Hi everyone, I am Dream Into Wealth. I know people watching this are trying to fall asleep. How are you? And I hope you are okay in life. Listen to my story and make yourself comfortable. Also, if y'all like this kind of stories, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Years turned over at pages in a book the wind kept open. The world out the valley had changed again, machines smaller, skies brighter, and people moving faster than thought. The still place remained in quiet Taylor, though fewer travelers came now. The hum wasn't lost, it was just hidden, tucked beneath the noise of progress. Those who stayed in the valley learned not to fight the times, but to listen beneath them, the way a miner listens for the heart of the mountain before swinging his pick. Among the few who still lived there was a woman named Soleil. She'd been born in a time when silence was a luxury, when every wall had a screen and every dream had a price tag. Her parents were city folk who'd come to the valley hoping to find peace, but left when they realized peace took work. Soleil stayed. Even as a child, she'd sit by the river for hours, watching the reeds sway, humming along with the wind. "You hear it too?" the elders would ask her, and she'd nod solemnly, although she'd been listening since before she was born. By the time she grew older, the hum had woven itself into her. She could sense it in the smallest things, the tilt of a leaf, the way embers cracked, the hushful rain. Folks in the nearby town started calling her the listener. They'd come seeking advice, not because she was a prophet, because she had a way of making silence answer. She'd listen to their troubles, close her eyes, and after a while say something simple, that "You're walking too quick for your own footsteps," or "Don't mistake noise for company." Somehow those words always fit. But one autumn, the hum changed. Not louder, not fainter, just different. The rhythm stuttered, then stopped for a breath too long. The valley air turned restless. Even the river seemed to hesitate before moving. Soleil felt it first, like the world had forgotten its line in a song it had sung forever. "You all right, old friend?" she whispered into the earth. No answer came. Just a long silence that felt heavy enough to bend the trees. The next day, she led what few villagers remained, the hum weakening, she said. He looked at her with quiet fears. "Maybe it dying," one murmured. Soleil shook her head. "Patience don't die, but it does fade when we stop listening." Sprawl. They listened harder for days, weeks, months. They stopped work, stopped trade, stopped all things that weren't hearing. But the silence deepened, and with it came unease. Crops grew uneven, the wind lost its tune, and one by one the villagers began drifting away, saying the world beyond might have answers. Soleil stayed. She couldn't leave. The hum had raised her, held her, taught her. She owed her to listen even if it never sang again. Winter came, colder than most. Snow buried the valley, muting even the wind. Soleil spent her nights by the hearth, watching the fire flicker low. One night, as she sat there humming the old rhythm to herself, she heard something met from out, but from beneath. A faint ache, slow and broken, a breath through stone. She pressed her ear to the floorboards and smiled. "You're still there," she whispered. "Just tired," the hum answered weakly. "You remember too much?" She frowned. "And that what keeps us true? Sometimes it keeps us still." She thought on that a long while, then nodded. Then maybe it time for the world to take a louder turn. She stood, wrapped her shawl tight, and stepped outside into the snow. The valley was silver and still, the stars bright enough to touch. She walked to the river, now frozen under glassy ice, and knelt. "If the hum needs rest," she said softly, "then I'll keep it company." She lay her palm on the ice, and the cold spread through her with memory. Then, in one deep breath, she began to sing. Not words, just tone, low, even, patient, the kind of sound that could wake an old god or soothe a crying child. The air trembled, the ice hummed back, the ground beneath her began to vibrate, not violent, but steady. It was as if the valley itself was answering. Snow fell in spirals, the trees bowed, and the stars pulsed in rhythm. "Yeah. And when her voice finally faded, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full. The hum returned, not than it had been, but renewed, wilder, younger. It moved through the valley like a storm remembering its purpose. Soleil smiled, tears freezing on her cheeks. "There you are," she whispered. "Didn't think you'd forget the tune." In the days that followed, travelers came again. draw awe by stories of the valley that sang. Some said they could hear it even from the mountain passes, a deep chord that made the heart ache. When they arrived, they found Celine gone, but in her cabin, carved into the wood above the hearth, were 6 words. When silence listens, the world heals. They made those words the Valley Creed. And though no one ever saw Celine again, they said that when snow falls quiet and the wind drifts just right, you can still hear her voice in the hum, keeping time with the heartbeat of the earth. Generations later, when the noise of new empires rose again, folks would still speak of her, the listener who sang the hum awake. The keeper who proved that patience ain't weakness and silence ain't absence. It's the breath before the next beginning, and maybe that all this story was. The world forgetting and remembering in turns, people listening and falling, quiet again. The hum changing pitch, but never losing its song. It's the sound of time reminding us that the greatest wealth ain't what we keep, but what we keep listening for. So if one day you find yourself in some quiet place after the noise has worn you thin, stop, breathe, you might just catch it. The faint tremor of the old world humming through your bones, whispering that it's your turn now to remember. Seasons folded into one another like blankets laid by unseen hands. The still place became myth again, its name softened by distance and time. Maps forgot it, songs misplaced it, but the hum kept traveling. It slipped through cracks in mountains, whispered under the feet of wanderers, found its way into lullabies sung by mothers who never knew why their voices felt right on a certain note. Even in the cities, where silence had to fight for breath, the hum hid in the machinery, in the rhythm of rain on glass, and in the heartbeat of those who still remembered how to pause. It reached a young boy named Elias first. He was born in one of those glass cities, where every wall spoke and every shadow was numbered. His parents worked in the upper tiers of the finance towers, machines of light that traded time and data faster than the blink of an eye. Elias was raised among charts and screens, where wealth was measured not by what you built, but by what you predicted. Yet he always felt something hollow in the air, like the world was humming out of tune. At night, he'd press his ear to the window and listen to the rain until it almost sounded like music. Almost. One evening, when the power grid flickered, a rare thing in a city that worshipped constancy, the hum broke through, soft but clear, a note beneath the static. Elias froze. It was not the sound of failure or malfunction. It was alive. He turned off every device, heart pounded, and waited. There it was again, low, steady, patient. Didn't tell anyone. How could he? No one in the city had time for things they couldn't measure. But from that night on, he carried it with him like a secret. Years passed. He grew clever, like his parents, working his way up through the towers until he managed data streams and forecast markets. His life became numbers exact, efficient, endless, but the hum never left. It played beneath the chatter of his meetings, the whir of his terminals, the faint rhythm of the elevators rising and falling. One day, he stopped in the middle of a trading floor, hundreds of screens flashing around him, and realized every heartbeat in that room was out of sync. No two souls moving together. We've forgotten the rhythm, he whispered. That night, he walked out, just like that. No resignation, no announcement. He left his badge on the counter and stepped into the rain. The city lights turned the sky into a false dawn, but beneath the roar of engines and drones, the hum was waiting. It led him down to the underlayers of the city-old tunnels where time had slowed. The deeper he went, the clearer it became, until finally he found himself standing before a door rocked with a spiral. Not etched, grown. The metal itself had remembered the shape he matched. The door hummed back. Inside was a chamber, long abandoned. Dust on the walls, but the air alive. And in the center, a coin, not golden, not new, just still. Its hum filled the space, vibrating through his ribs like a second heartbeat. He knelt, reached out, and felt the weight of it. When his skin met metal, the lights above flickered, and he saw viz. Not clear pictures, but impressions. The river, the valley, the wanderer, the listener, the builder, the keeper. Each one breathing through him like wind through tall grass. He staggered back, breathless. Why me? He asked. The hum deepened, slowly aside, because it's your turn to remember. So he did. He remembered not with words, but with action. He left the city behind, taking the coin with him, walking west until the towers faded to silhouettes. It took him months, crossing plains and forests, following rivers that sometimes whispered back to him. He slept under stars instead of numbers, and everywhere he went, the hum grew stronger, not around him, but through him. By the time he reached the sea, his footsteps had already fallen into rhythm with the waves. There, on a quiet stretch of coast no map claimed, he stopped. The air was heavy with salt and memory. He built a small shack out of driftwood, lived off rainwater and the tide generosity. Days bled into each other until time stopped, feeling like something to spend. One morning, he woke to find the coin humming louder than ever, the sound flowing straight into the surf. He followed it down to the water edge. The sea was calm, the sky clear, and in that stillness, he heard it all. The stories, the lies, the patience that had shaped the world from silence to sound.
Smiled. So this is where it began. The hum pulsed once, and where it always begins yet. He dropped the coin into the sea. The moment it touched the water, the horizon lit faintly gold. Not fire, not light, memory. The hum rolled across the waves into the deep, into the bones of the earth. And for the first time in 1,000 years, every living thing, fish, bird, human, tree, paused for a heartbeat, breathing in perfect unison. Then the sound faded, leaving the world quieter than it had been, but not empty. Whole. Elias stayed by the shore the rest of his life. He became a myth to those who found him. A hermit who could calm storms with silence, who spoke to the sea and got answers in return. But he never thought himself anything more than a listener. The hum don't belong to me, he'd say to those who asked. It needed someone to pass through. When he died, the ocean didn't roar, it breathed. The waves rose and fell slow, mournful, tender.
And when dawn came, a sealed spiral of shells had formed in the sand beside his home, each one humming softly when touched. Travelers who passed by took one each, carrying the tone wherever they went. The hum spread again, not through machines or stories, but through hands, through the act of giving. So it went, and it always had. The world forgot, then remembered. People hurried, then slowed. And through it, the hum remained steady, a quiet proof that balance ain't a thing you build or buy, it a thing you join. A wealth that don't fade when shared. And maybe someday, long after names and cities are dust, when the last fire crackles and the last rain falls, someone will hear it again. The hum, low and kind, drifting through the quiet dark. They'll pause, smile, and say, there you are. And the world will hum back, same always. Here I've been, years blurred into centuries once more, and even the sea forgot his name. But the hum remembered. It always did. It drifted with the tides, climbed through the veins of mountains, rested in the quiet between lightning and thunder, learned new forms, turned into data, then into breath again. The world kept changing, and so did the hum, patient, a heartbeat, waiting for someone else to slow down long enough to hear it proper. That someone was a woman named Noor. She lived far from any shore, in a land of the sun painted everything gold, and the wind sang across dunes that moved dyed memory. The people there were traders, storytellers, wanderers. They spoke of the hum, sometimes called it the steady one, the breath of the earth, but most thought it just another story meant to soothe restless children. Noor had never believed in such tales. She was practical, sharp-eyed, and silent by habit. Her trade was numbers carved into sand tablets and glass chips, tallies that measured grain, water, and time, but she was lonely in a way no counting could fix. Every night she'd walk out into the desert to escape the noise of her city. Out there, silence had shaped. You could feel it leaning against your skin. One such sight, when the stars hung low enough to seem touchable, she heard something faint and deep like the desert itself was breathing. She stopped. The air shimmered beneath her feet. The sand trembled once, twice, then settled into a slow rhythm. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't her heart. It was something older, something patient. She knelt and pressed her ear to the ground. The sound vibrated through her skull, soft but endless. For reasons she couldn't explain, tears filled her eyes. "You waited," she whispered. The hum didn't answer, but it didn't need to. She understood what it was saying. It always said the same thing. Listen longer. Noor returned to that spot night after night. Each time, she brought one less belonging. First her tools, then her records, then her shoes. The more she listened, the lighter she became. It wasn't about faith or mysticism. It was a rhythm, plain and true, like the pulse of a living world. After a while, she made patterns in the hum, echoes that matched the way stars crossed the sky. She began drawing them in the sand, spirals, waves, loops that met and parted like conversations. She didn't know it, but she was drawing the same shapes that Leanne had once seen, that Mara had once calculated, that Elias had once dreamed in glass. The desert started changing, not with miracles, just with patience. Wells that had long run dry began filling in. The nights cooled softer, the dunes grew gentle, and travelers found their way more easily than before. Word spread. People came, at first a few, then many. They thought her the keeper of silence, though she never kept a thing. I don't own it, she told them. As you reminded, we're still listening. Years passed, and her little camp became a haven for the tired and the lost. They'd sit by the fires at dusk, listening to the sand sing beneath them. Some said the hum was stronger when Noor was near. Others claimed it came from her voice itself when she told stories. She'd laugh softly at that. It don't come from me, she'd say. It just passes through. One evening, a great storm swept the horizon, black and gold, thunder rolling like a beast waking up. The people panicked, gathering their things, but Noor stood still, eyes closed. Don't run, she said. It's just the hum remembering its other voice. And when the storm hit, instead of destroying, it reshaped. The dune shifted, revealing a hollow beneath the earth, a cavern carved in perfect spirals, its walls humming with the same low tone that had called her there years before. When the storm passed, she stepped inside, torch in hand, the air shimmered, gold dust dancing like embers. At the chamber center, half buried in sand, was something small and round, a coin worn smooth, the spiral faint but unbroken. She picked it up. The hum rose until it filled the space, stronger than she'd have heard it. Every grain of sand seemed to tremble in unison, singing not with words, but with memory. Faces flickered in the air, the wanderer by the river, the builder of resonance, the listener winter, the boy from the glass city. All of them smiling, all of them humming the same rhythm, the lineage of patience, unbroken. Noor laughed through her tears. You never left, she whispered. The hum deepened, surrounding her. We never do. She carried the coin back to the surface and showed it to her people. This, she said, ain't treasure, a reminder. And from that day, they built their homes in spirals, not squares, each circle facing the wind, each wall left open to let the hum pass through. They called their settlement Al-Mutasim, the place that waits. It became a place of pilgrimage for those who'd lost their rhythm, where silence was sacred and time was measured not in minutes, but in breaths. When Noor grew old, she asked to be buried not beneath the dunes, but in them, where the hum was strongest. Her last words were quiet. If you listen right, you'll hear me laughing in the sand. Sure enough, on windy nights, the desert still hums her name, soft and slow. Generation later, scholars tried to study Al-Mutasim. They built instruments, sensors, theories, but none could capture the sound. One scientist, staying longer than most, finally wrote in her notes, "It not measurable, 'cause it not external. The hum isn't heard, it remembered." Maybe she was right. Maybe every generation just rediscovers what the first already knew, that wealth ain't built from more, but from stillness. That every coin, every stone, every breath carries the same hum when it held with care. They called their settlement Al-Mutasim, the place that waits. It became a place of pilgrimage for those who'd lost their rhythm, where silence was sacred and time was measured not in minutes, but in breaths. When Noor grew old, she asked to be buried not beneath the dunes, but in them, where the hum was strongest. Her last words were quiet. If you listen right, you'll hear me laughing in the sand. Sure enough, on windy nights, the desert still hums her name, soft and slow. Generation later, scholars tried to study Al-Mutasim. They built instruments, sensors, theories, but none could capture the sound. One scientist, staying longer than most, finally wrote in her notes, "It not measurable, 'cause it not external. The hum isn't heard, it remembered." Maybe she was right. Maybe every generation just rediscovers what the first already knew, that wealth ain't built from more, but from stillness. that every coin, every stone, every breath carries the same hum when it held with care. Maybe someday, when the dunes rise high enough to swallow the last of man towers, the hum will still et under the sand-steady, endless kind. Proof that patience, once learned, never dies. It keeps passing through. Centuries drifted past Al-Mutasim make the slow tide of sleep. The dunes shifted, swallowed, and uncovered again, yet somehow the pattern of the settlement always returned. Spiral streets, open roofs, homes that breathed with the wind. The people changed names, tongues, and trades, but the rhythm of their lives stayed the same, measured, deliberate, steady. They didn't call it the hum anymore, they just called it the balance. It was natural to them, the drawing breath, but far beyond the Zed, the rest of the world had forgotten again. Steel and sky merged, once more towers, scraped clouds, and lights outshone stars. They built machines that spoke louder than thunder and promised progress, though swift at patience began to sound like poverty. The hum still whispered underneath all that noise, but few had ears left to hear it, until one woman did, though she hadn't been looking for it at it.
Her name was Cass. She was an engineer, born in the labyrinth heart of a floating city that drifted over the oceans. Cass built engines the size of mountains, machines that turned storm and tide into endless motion. Her world prized speed and brilliance, and she was both. Folks said she could fix time if you gave her a wrench, but the faster her inventions turned, the quieter she felt inside. When she lay in her bunk at night, surrounded by the hum of engines, she found herself listening for something softer, older, steadier. It came one evening when the sky cracked open, a lightning storm rolled over the floating city, and the engines began to fail one by one. Cass was sent below deck to stabilize the power core, a sphere of glass and light that beat like a heart. She climbed down ladders slick with condensation, her boots ringing against the metal rungs, and when she reached the bottom, the storm roar dulled to a single tone. Not mechanical, not electrical, familiar. A hum deep enough to move her bones. Impossible, she muttered, checking the gauges. But the sound wasn't coming from the machine, it was coming from below it.
Through the floor. She knelt, pressed her hand to the deck, and the vibration passed through her palm like a memory waking up. The hum quickened in response, like it recognized her. Then, just as sudden, the power stabilized, the light steadied, and the alarms fell silent. Cass stared at the coal, at her reflection flickering in the glass. "You helping me?" she whispered. The hum gave no answer, but she felt its rhythm linger behind her heartbeat. After that night, Cass couldn't ignore it. She began hearing it in the patterns of turbines, the spin of gyros, the pulse of her own machinery. It wasn't magic, it was balance, the same invisible ratio that held the universe together when it stopped arguing with itself. She started rebuilding her engines around that principle, designing them not to dominate nature, but to join it. The results baffled her peers. Her machines used half the power, produced twice the yield, and somehow grew quieter the longer they ran. "They sound alive," one colleague said. Cass smiled faintly. "Maybe they are." Word spread, scientists, investors, philosophers all wanted her secret. But Cass didn't share it. "You can't patent patience," she told them. "You can practice it." They laughed, thinking she was poetic. But when she started building an engine that required stillness to start, one that only ran when every observer stopped speaking, they stopped laughing. "It inefficient," they said. "It unnatural." She just shrugged. So grieved, eventually she left the floating city altogether, took a small vessel and drifted south. Lowing the hum she could now feel in her sleep, storms came and went, but the tone never left. It pulled her toward the equator, toward an expanse of ocean where charts went blank. After days without horizon, she found it, a circle of calm water, perfectly still in the middle of chaos. The hum filled the air like breath held too long. "There you are," she whispered, guiding her ship into the stillness. In the center of that calm, the sea began to part, not with force, but with recognition. The waves folded outward, revealing a single column of stone jutting up from the deep. She anchored the ship and climbed onto it, the surface warm beneath her hands. Etched into the stone was a spiral, faint but endless.
The hum vibrated through her bones, and she felt tears rise unbidden. "You've been everywhere," she said, "and we never learned. Learning was never the goal," the hum said, though no mouth spoke. Remembering was, she sat there for hours, maybe days. Time lost its edge in that place. The hum told her stories, not in words, but in rhythm of deserts that listened, valleys that sang, rivers that remembered their builders, coins that waited to be returned. When she finally stood to leave, she touched the spiral one last time. "What do I do with this? Carry it without holding it," the hum replied. Cass returned to her city a changed woman. She dismantled her factories, turned her patents open, taught children instead of corporations. Her designs spread, not through trade but through kindness, machines that grew gardens, bridges that sang with wind, turbines that spun in rhythm with the tides, and wherever her designs reached, the hum followed. Quieter, gentle, alive. When she grew old, she built one final device, a sphere no larger than her hand. She called it the heart of still motion. It didn't spin, didn't glow, didn't hum. At least not until she set it down.
When she did, the air around it began to vibrate with a familiar sound. She smiled. You found your way home again. That night she died in her sleep, hand resting on the sphere. The city she left behind slowed dead enough to notice the dawn the next morning. Some said they heard a faint note in the wind that day, deep and steady, like the world sighing in relief. Generations later, when her workshop was long forgotten and the floating cities had descended back to Earth, folks found the sphere again buried in coral and rust. They said it still hums when the tide right, though none can explain why. But those who stand near it swear the sound feels like recognition, like the earth thanking them for waiting. Maybe that's what the hum always was. A thank you whispered across ages to anyone patient enough to hear it. Proof that quiet once shared can outlive empires. So if you stand by the water and the air goes still, listen close. It ain't just the sea or the wind, it's the same hum that started it off, remembering you the way you remember it. Slow, kind, ending.
They said the sea swallowed Cass' workshop whole, that it fell into the water one quiet morning without a sound, and the ocean simply folded over it like a page turned slow. But what no one saw, what no map vid rocked, was that her inventions didn't sink, they drifted. For decades, pieces of her machines wandered beneath the waves, carried by current and time until they scattered across the world. Every so often, a fragment would wash ashore, a copper gear that never rested, a glass lens that caught starlight even at noon, a shard of metal that hummed faintly when held against the chest. Folks called them Cass relics. Some sold them in curiosity. Others kept them in silence, swearing the hum calmed their dreams. One of those relics found its way inland, traded and sold until it reached the hands of a man named Jonah. He wasn't a builder or a dreamer, just a farmer, living on a patch of land between hills where the soil was thin and the wind unkind. Life was steady, small, and predictable. Every morning he'd rise before the sun, mend fences, fix tools, and count the sky moods like an old friend with bad habits.
But when he held that fragment, curved sliver of brass no bigger than a coin, the wind went quiet. It was the first stillness he'd known in years. He didn't tell anyone about it. What was there to tell? It didn't glow, didn't sing, didn't do nothing that impressed a man with debts and dry fields. But every night, when the wind howled, Jonah would take the relic out and hold it in his palm. The hum would rise, faint but steady, until even the storm seemed to slow down to listen. He started sleeping better. The crops grew stronger, the livestock calmed. Coincidence, he told himself, but part of him knew better. Months passed, and the hum deepened. He began to hear it not just in the relic, but in everything. The plow cutting through soil, the creak of the barn door, the soft beat of his own pulse. It was not loud, just true. When the rains finally came, he didn't rush to the fields like the others. He stood still in it, hat tipped low, listening to the world breathe again. That night, sitting by the fire, he realized he hadn't thought about money or yield all day, just rhythm. And somehow, that made him feel richer than he'd been. Word spread through the valley. Jonah Farm sings, folks said. They came to see it, merchants, neighbors, travelers. Each one found something odd about the place. The animals grazed in perfect unison. The wind never broke a fence post, and even the shadows seemed to move at a gentle pace. When they asked him his secret, Jonah just shrugged. Ain't got one, he said. I'd listen before I act. One evening, a stranger rode in from the east, tall fella, gay beard, eyes sharp by dawn. He wore a coat patched with the colors of faraway lands and carried no weapon, just a flute slung from his belt. He asked Jonah if he could stay a night in the barn, and Jonah, being a man of quiet manners, agreed. After supper, they sat by the fire, neither speaking for a while. Then the stranger said, "The place hums." Jonah froze. "You hear it too?" The man nodded, smelling faint. "I've been following that sound a long while, across rivers, through cities, even under the ground."
Always thought it was leading me to someone, not somewhere. He took out his flute and began to play. The tune was simple, slow, patient. A memory remembering itself. The hum rose to meet it.
blending so seamless it was impossible to tell where sound ended and silence began. When the song faded, Jonah found tears streaking his cheeks. "What is it?" he asked. The man smiled. "Depend on who you ask. Some say it the earth breathing, others say it what left of all the folks who learned how to listen. Me, I just call it the hum." They sat in silence again, both listening. The fire cracked softly, the night deepened, and somewhere beyond the hills the wind carried that same old rhythm. Before dawn, the man packed up, leaving the flute behind. "You'll need it more than me," he said. "The hum moving inland again. Someone got to keep it steady," and then he was gone, leaving no tracks in the wet grass. Jonah kept the flute, though he never learned to play it proper.
He'd blow a few soft notes every morning, and the hum would rise in answer, threading through the valley. Like a prayer too old for words, the people started mulling not got to see the farm, but to hear it. They'd sit for hours in silence, listening to the land breathe. Strangers began leaving things behind, coins, letters, seeds, promises. None asked for nothing in return. The farm became a sanctuary for patience, a place where time slowed long enough for folks to remember their own rhythm. Jonah lived long enough to see the world grow noisy again, machines humming louder than rivers, markets buzzing faster than seasons. But the hum never left his valley. Even after he passed, the sound lingered, woven into the roots of the grass, the stone of the well, the flute hanging above his fireplace. Travelers still come, they're hoping to find miracles, others just looking for a reason to rest. Most leave changed, though they can't say how. It ain't the air, one wrote in his journal. It's the way silence feels heavier here, like it waiting for you to join in. Maybe that what Jonah left behind. A reminder that wealth ain't built on accumulation, but alignment. Let everything for keeping peace, time, love, move to a rhythm slower than want. And if you're lucky and quiet enough, you might got hear the hum too. Not from the world around you, but from the part inside that finally still enough to answer back. And if someday the wind carries that tone to your window, low, patient, familiar, don't rush to name it. Just sit a spell, listen, let it pass through, because that's what it always done. It always will. There's a legend that says Jonah Valley still sings when the rain falls right. Not with melody, but with memory. The sound travels down the hills and over the plains, catching on fences, rattling windows, sneaking into folks' dreams. Most think it's just the wind or the way wet soil settles, but ever so fond, someone will wake in the middle of the night swearing they heard something older than time humming beneath their heartbeat. One such soul was a boy named Levi. He grew up in the same valley, though long after Jonah's name had faded into rumor. Levi folks ran a store that sold everything a wanderer might need, but nothing a wanderer could carry forever. Wasn't like the other children, quieter, always watching the horizon vase, if it were whispering something only he could hear. When storms rolled in, he'd run outside barefoot and stand in the mud, arms wide, eyes closed, listening till his mother dragged him back in, scolding him for acting like a fool. But even as he grew, the habit never left. The world got faster noises, and Levi found it harder to breathe inside its pace. He tried his hand at everything, farming, trade, even aiding, but none of it stuck. One evening, after another long day of doing work that didn't feel like living, he sat by the river that wound through the valley and noticed something strange. The current wasn't moving right. The surface rippled in rhythm, like a song he couldn't quite place. Then came the hum, soft, low, patient. He froze, every muscle remembering a thing his mind never learned. The sound grew steady, like breath beneath the water. He knelt, hand reaching out, and when his fingers touched the river surface, the hum deepened, not from below, but through him. The air shimmered, and for a brief moment he saw something, a figure in the reflection, not his own.
An old man with kind eyes and weather hands, standing in a field under gray skies, holding a flute. The vision vanished with the next ripple, but the feeling didn't. Levi sat there to dawn, listening. The next morning he walked into town and told the blacksmith he was quitting, sold what little he owned, packed a bag, and left without explaining. He followed the river east, letting it decide his path. When asked where he was going, he'd just smile and say, listening. Folks thought he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had, but there are worse ways to lose it than trying to remember the Earth First song. Days turned to months, the river widened, grew wilder, and Levi learned to travel by its moods. He slept under bridges, ate what the land offered, and talked to strangers who seemed to recognize something in his stillness. One night, while camping near an old dam, he met a woman who played the fiddle for travelers. Her mute wasn't polished, rough, honest, the kind that carried more truth than tune. After she finished, Levi asked if she had played for silence. And
An old man with kind eyes and weather hands, standing in a field under gray skies, holding a flute. The vision vanished with the next ripple, but the feeling didn't. Levi sat there to dawn, listening. The next morning, he walked into town and told the blacksmith he was quitting, sold what little he owned, packed a bag, and left without explaining. He followed the river east, letting it decide his path. When asked where he was going, he'd just smile and say, listening. Folks thought he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had, but there are worse ways to lose it than trying to remember the earth for a song. Days turned to months, the river widened, grew wilder, and Levi learned to travel by its moods. He slept under bridges, ate what the land offered, and talked to strangers who seemed to recognize something in his stillness. One night, while camping near an old dam, he met a woman who played the fiddle for travelers. Her mute wasn't polished, rough, honest, the kind that carried more truth than tune. After she finished, Levi asked if she had played for silence. She laughed.
Ain't no man that, she said, silence don't tip. But later, when she thought he was asleep, she played again soft. Even the crickets held their breath. When the song ended, she whispered, "Did you hear it?" He nodded, always. They traveled together for a while, her fiddle and his silence learning each other's pace. They perform in small towns, never for money, just to remind folks what stillness sounded like when wrapped in warmth. Some nights she'd play till dawn, and Levi would swear he could hear the hum beneath her notes, guiding the melody like an invisible hand. "What that sound you're following?" she asked one night by the fire. He thought for a while before answering. It's the part of the world that don't rush their paths split in spring. She left for the coast, and he kept wandering inland. Years passed. The world grew louder still, machines that never stopped humming, people who mistook motion for progress. But Levi's pace never changed. He learned to live from what others left behind, forgotten garden, old wells, broken roads. In every ruin he found a rhythm waiting to be remembered.
Began fixing things not for profit, but for quiet. A windmill lit, a bridge there, a clock tower that long stopped ticking. Folks started calling him the listener. He didn't correct them.
Then, one autumn evening, he came upon a village built around a lake. The water was still, then glass, and at its center stood a spire half sunk, its bell silent, its reflection perfect. The villagers told him the bell hadn't rung in generations. It cracked after a storm, and no one dared fix it. It cursed, they said. Every man who climbed it lost his balance. Levi lived at the spire and smiled. Maybe they weren't listening. That night, he rode out alone. The villagers watched from shore, muttering prayers. When he reached the base, he pressed his palm to the stone. It was cold at first, then warm, then humming, the same tone that had followed him since the river. He climbed, hand over hand, each step guided by rhythm rather than sight. At the top, beneath a moon swollen with silver, he touched the cracked bell. "You still remember, don't you?" he whispered. The metal trembled in reply. Then, with one gentle push, he set it swinging.
The sound that followed wasn't a clang, but a chord resonance deep enough to stir the water below. The lake rippled outward, catching moonlight that glassed breathin'. The hum filled the air, spread through the valley, reached the villagers' bones. Some fell to their knees, others wept without knowing why. When the bell stilled, Levi was gone. Only the boat drifted back to shore, empty but humming softly, as if the night itself were keeping time. After that, the lake never froze again. The crops thrived, and travelers claimed to hear uke in the wind when passing through. They built no monument, raised no shrine, just left the spire be, because songs, they figured, were better left to play themselves. And maybe, if you stand by that lake when the air right, you'll hear it too. Not the bell, not the water, but the hum steady as ebb, moving through time the way a kind hand meaves through memory. The world may have forgotten Jonah, Cass, Noor, and all the others who carried it, but the hum don't care about names. It just waits for whoever willing to listen next. Years rolled by that wind through wheat.
The story of the listener bell drifted across towns, the way mist travels, rivers thin, shapeless but lingering. Nobody remembered Levi's face. Some said he was a spirit, others a drifter who'd found peace in the soundlet places between time. The lake became a pilgrim rest stop. Folks would come not to pray, but to pause. They'd sit by the water, close their eyes, and swear they could hear something vast and calm humming beneath the waves, old as the sky, patient dust. The world outside still churned, machines grinding, traders shouting, cities spitting light into the dark. But there in that valley, everything moved at the pace of listening.
Among those travelers was a woman named Rosa, a teacher by trade, though she'd stopped teaching long before she arrived at the lake. The world she'd left behind was busy with progress, children trained to remember facts but forget wonder, schools that measured margins like crops, always calculating yield. Rosa had loved her students once, But each year she'd felt the silence inside them grow thinner, the way a field turns to dust after two made harvests. She left without farewell.
Is ya? Let Co's took it like a noble journal, and a broken compass her father had given her. The compass needle never pointed north anymore. It yet trembled like it was lost or listening to something she couldn't hear.
When she reached the lake, it was dusk. The water looked like glass stretched to the edge of the world. Rosa sat at the shore, laid the compass on her knee, and waited for what? She didn't know. Maybe for the hum she'd heard whispered about in the towns along her road. Maybe be for herself. Hours passed, stars blinked awake, and the wind carried a faint vibration across the surface. Not a sound, more like a pulse. The compass needle steadied. It pointed straight toward the spire. Rosa smiled. So that vet you've been trying to go? She rented a small hut near the edge of town and stayed. Days turned into months. She spoke little, worked the garden, taught the local children how to listen to rain, not to hear it, but to listen. Hearing fast, she'd say, listening patient. They didn't always understand, but they liked sitting still with her while the storm passed. When spring came, she started taking her students to the lake. They'd sit on the shore, notebooks forgotten, and wait. Tomorrow, when she reached the lake, it was dusk. The water looked like glass stretched to the edge of the world. Rosa sat at the shore, laid the compass on her knee, and waited. For what? She didn't know. Maybe for the hum she'd heard whispered about in the towns along her road, maybe for herself. Hours passed. Stars blinked awake, and the wind carried a faint vibration across the surface. Not a sound, more like a pulse. The compass needle steadied. It pointed straight toward the spire. Rosa smiled. So that vet you've been trying to go? She rented a small hut near the edge of town and stayed. Days turned into months. She spoke little, worked the garden, taught the local children how to listen to rain, not to hear it, but to listen. Hearing fast, she'd say, listening patient. They didn't always understand, but they liked sitting still with her while the storm passed. When spring came, she started taking her students to the lake. They'd sit on the shore, notebooks forgotten, and wait. Some days the hum came, some days it didn't. That part of it she'd tell them. Patience is the price of music.
As years passed, the children grew, left, and built lives elsewhere. But every one of them carried a little of that quiet with them. Some became farmers who let the soil rest longer between crops. Some became builders who designed homes that caught the wind instead of fighting it. Some became traders who refused to shout.
And though none of them saw the hum, they kept a piece of it, the rhythm that sits behind every honest breath.
Rosa grew older, her hands lined like the fields she tended. One winter night, a storm rolled through, fierce enough to shake the huts from their posts. She stood by her window and saw lightning strike the lake, splitting the surface open in silver fire. The hum roared through the valley, loud enough to make the earth tremble. When it faded, she knew the bell had rung again, not from touch this time, but from memory. She pulled on her coat, took her compass, and walked into the storm.
By dawn, the village found her sitting on the shore, soaked but smiling, the compass needle glowing faint gold. It sang, she whispered when they tried to lead her home. The world still remembers its tune. They didn't argue. They wrapped her in blankets and let her rest. After that night, the storms came softer, and the crops grew stronger. The villagers began holding gatherings by the lake once a year. No speeches, no trade, just silence shared. They died the day of still wind. When Rosa passed, the children she once taught returned grown folk, rigging their own young. They built a small circle of stones where she'd sat and left her compass in the middle. It never rusted, and even now they say the needle quivers when the hum drifts through the valley. Nobody claims to understand it. Nobody tries to. They just keep the circle swept clean and the silence unbroken. And maybe that the truest form of wealth there is, caring for what you can't own. Each generation thinks it discovers peace. Truth is, it just remembers it again for a while before forgetting. The hum patient with that always has been.
Bishop knows that no matter how loud the world gets, someone, somewhere, will stop long enough to listen in. So when the wind stills and the night feels heavier than usual, maybe it ain't the end of noise you're hearing. Maybe at the start of music too slow for her to notice. Maybe the hum sliding back into earshot, carrying all those old stories Jonah Quiet Fields, Castile Engines, Levi Bell, Robichaud the Compass. Different voices, same tone. If you're lucky enough to hear it, don't rush to write it down. Don't bottle it, don't brand it, don't call it divine. Just breathe with it, because every soul that there found balance did it the same way, but forgetting themselves just long enough to remember everything else. One day, the valley will fade, the lake will dry, and the stones will crumble, but the hum will move on. Maybe into the crackle of a fire, maybe into the hush of a rainy roof, maybe into the heart of someone sitting by that fire, wondering why the quiet feels alive. And when that happens, the story will start again. Not with a name, but with a rhythm slow, certain, unbreakable, because peace don't vanish.
Wait,
And time, if you're kind to it, always circles back. After Rosa passing, her story wove itself into the bones of the valley, like an old tune that couldn't quite die. The villagers, still dead by the lake each year, but as time stretched on and generations turned, they forgot who started the circle, who planted the first stones, who whispered the word "listen" into the ears of their children. All they knew was that once every 12 moons they came together, stood still, and waited for the hum. Some years it came softly, others not at aught, but no one had left disappointed. The waiting itself was the blessing. Then, one autumn, a child named Elias broke the circle. He was small, curious, full of the kind of restlessness the quiet world can't hold. While the others stood still by the lake, Elias wandered off toward the hills, dragging a stick behind him. The wind picked up, rolling dry leaves across the fields like rust-colored coins. When he reached the ridge, he stopped. Below him, the valley shimmered with dusk, the lake glinted like a mirror half buried in gold. But the sound, the sound was gone.
For the first time in his short life, the hum wasn't there. Not faint, not distant, not hiding, just gone. He ran back, breathless, asking the elders why the hum had stopped. They told him it hadn't. It was just quiet this year. But Elias shook his head. No, he said, it's gone, like it moved. The elders smiled and sent him home, calling it childish imagination. Yet that night, long after the fires dimmed, a few of them sat up listening. Sure enough, the silence felt different, not restful, empty. Elias couldn't sleep. The stillness gnawed at him. So he packed a sachet with bread and water, hooked Rosa's old compass from the stone circle, and set out at dawn. The needle spun once, twice, then steadied, not north but west, toward the mountains. He followed it without question. The first days were easy. Meadows, streams, soft weather. Then came the hard ones. Cold rain, thin air, and paths too narrow for doubt. Through it, he carried the compass in his palm, feeling its faint vibration like a heartbeat that was on his own. Weeks passed before he reached the mountains.
His slopes were scarred by stone and wind, their peaks hidden in cloud. He climbed higher each day, the silence growing deeper with every step. No birds, no rivers, not even the sound of his own boots. After a while, just a stillness so pure it pressed on his chest. Then, one night, he saw light flickering on the horizon, a single golden pulse, slow and rhythmic. He followed it to a cavern carved into the rock, where the walls shimmered with veins of metal older than language. The hum waited there, faint but alive, echoing through the stone like a voice remembering how to speak. In the center of the cave sat a man, gray-haired, eyes closed, breathing in time with the hum. He wore no crown, no robe, just a worn jacket and a piece Elias could feel from the doorway. You came far, the man said without opening his eyes. I was following the sound, Elias said, but it stopped back home. The man nodded. It didn't stop, it rested.
Even the hum needs silence now and then. Elias stepped closer, the compass still humming in his hand. What are you doing? The zip? Waiting, the man said simply. Been waiting for the next ear that could hear it. Guess that you, the boy frowned. What am I supposed to do? The man smiled, finally opening his eyes, clear morning after storm. Listen long enough to understand, then leave before you start explaining it. They sat together in a cave for days. The hum changed days. They breathed sometimes low as thunder, sometimes high as rain on glass. Elias began to hear patterns in it, stories without words, lessons without rules. He saw visions of the past, Jonah and his quiet farm, Cass and her still machines, Levi ringing the bell, Rosa waiting by the water. Every life, every silence, part of the say slow symphony. It all one sound, Elias whispered. The old man nodded. Always was. When the boy finally rose to leave, he looked back. Will I hear it again? The man chuckled. Son, once you hear the hum, you never stop hearing it. The trick, remembering to answer Elias, climbed down the mountain, the compass glowing faint in his pocket. When he reached the valley, he didn't tell anyone what he'd found. Instead, he built a small workshop at the edge of town, just like Jonah once did. Not with machines or tools, but with patience. He taught children to sit in silence till they could hear the hum again. Don't listen for sound, he'd say. Listen for stillness. At first, they giggled, restless of wind. But one by one, they learned. When they did, the valley began to hum again. Not from stone or bell, but from hearts beating slow and steady in time with the earth. Elias grew old. The old patient souls do. Before he passed, he placed the compass in a small wooden box and carved into the lid a single phrase. When the world forgets, for the quiet. The box passed through hands and centuries, collecting dust and stories until no one remembered the boy who'd made it. But somehow the compass always found its way back to someone who needed it. Sometimes a sailor lost at sea, sometimes a mother sitting by her child's sickbed, sometimes a man lowering out the window of a train, trying to remember why speed don't feel like progress anymore, and always, when they held it, they'd feel a pulse, not loud, just true. Maybe that's how the hum travels now, not through sound or stone or song, but through patience itself, through the moments between breaths. As the world remembers it ain't at war with time, it learning to move beside it. So if someday you find yourself lost, stand still as sail, take off your boots, let the wind pass through. Maybe it'll speak, maybe it won't, but if you listen long enough, you'll feel it. The hum, quiet and old, whispering the same thing it always said. You ain't alone, you're just early. They say time don't move in straight lines. It circles slow as smoke, always drifting back toward where it started. So it was with the compass. Years after Elias' hands turned to dust, the box resurfaced on a merchant table in a port city no map remembered building. The man selling it didn't know what he had. He said it had been found in a wreck, half buried in coral. The wood softened by salt, but the needle still trembling, like it had a secret left to tell. Most walked past uninterested. Trinkets were plenty in those days. Machines could print miracles faster than men could believe in them. But one woman stopped. Her name was June, and she wasn't looking for a compass, she was looking for direction. June worked at a clerk in a tower filled with glass and humming screens. Her days were a repetition of numbers that never ended, a tide of ledgers and reports that meant nothing once the sun went down. She'd grown numb to the rhythm of it. At the mechanical heart of the city beat too fast for any soul to match. But something in that little box drew her. Maybe it was the hum she imagined she heard, or maybe it was the way the merchant said the needle didn't peat anywhere known. It jet moves, he said, like it following something the rest of us forgot. Jim bought it without haggling. It was the first decision in years that felt like hers. At night, in her apartment high above the streets, she'd set the compass on the windowsill. It didn't spin or glow. It quivered faintly whenever the city went quiet enough to notice. She'd stare at it for hours, wondering what it was trying to hear. One evening, a storm swept through, knocking the power out. The hum of the city died, and for the first time, June could hear her own breath ants. In that silence, the compass came alive. The needle steadied, then began to pulse slow, rhythmic, almost kind. She pressed her ear against it and heard a low vibration, deep paid memory. The hum. She quit her job the next morning. Nobody believed her reason, and she didn't bother explaining. She packed a small bag, slipped the compass into her coat pocket, and left the city by train. It didn't paint north or south, just quivered gently when she leaned toward the open window. So she rode wherever it hummed. The first few weeks were confusion. She stopped in towns that had forgotten patience, places where people spoke too loud to hear themselves think. But sometimes when she sat by rivers or old bridges, the needle would calm. She started cutting those places the quiet corners, a bakery where the owner kneaded dough without rush, a library that still used candlelight, a farm where the air smelled like old rain. Everywhere she went, she'd take a stone or a leaf, something small, as if gathering proof that stillness could still exist. Months became years. June's hair grayed, her hands grew calloused from the road, but she never stopped following the hum. It led her across plains, through forests, down forgotten roads lined with the bones of machines. Each step felt like an unlearning a loosen of the noise she once mistook for living. One night, she reached a valley that felt older than sound itself. The compass needle froze, then stilled entirely. June smiled. "So this is it," she whispered, "where you've been going all along." In the center of that valley stood a stone circle half swallowed by moss. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising off calm water. June stepped inside, and the hum returned, low, endless, aching with welcome. She knelt and placed the compass on the ground. Its needle didn't move, but the earth beneath it pulsed once, twice, then went still. The box lid creaked open by itself, revealing a carving she hadn't knit before, words worn but legible. "When the world forgets, fine, quiet." She laughed softly. "You're late, old friend," she said, "but I made it." The hum rose around her like a tide, and for the first time she didn't feel small. She felt included. The air shimmered brighter, and in that shimmer she saw them figures made of memory and patience. Jonah standing in his field, Cass by her engine, Levi with his bell, Rosa by the lake, Elias on his mountain, all smiling not at her but through her. The hum joined her heartbeat until there was no difference between the two.
When dawn came, the valley was empty. The compass lay in the center of the stone ring, needle still. A shepherd found it days later and took it home, thinking it a good luck charm. That night, his flock stayed calm through a thunderstorm for the first time in years. He told no one, just kept it by his bedside, listening when the wind grew still.
And so the hum moved on again. Not through fame, not through grand design, but through small hands that cared enough to keep it close. It found its way into music, into architecture, into the way a craftsman paused before carving the first line. It seeped into lullabies, into the space between words, into the patience of those who built not for speed, but for staying. No one wanted the hum anymore. They didn't need to. It was everywhere. In the way a city paused at dawn before awakened, in the way two strangers shared silence instead of talk, in the rhythm of work done with care, not pride. The world hadn't changed much, still loud, still hungry, but under all that, something softer endured, a currency no one could print, spend, or hoard, a wealth measured in stillness. And maybe, when the last machine stops humming and the final clock forgets to tick, all that'll be left, the quiet heartbeat of the world itself, remembering how it used to listen. So if one night you find yourself alone by a fire or the sound of rain and the air starts to tremble with a tone you can't name, don't move.
That not your imagination. That the hum, finding its way back home. Wait long enough and it'll settle in your chest too. You won't own it, you'll just keep it a while, same way all the others did before you. Then, someday, when you've learned to carry it without holding it, it'll move on there. And that'll be proof enough that you listened right. There came a time, long after June compass vanished from any hand that remembered its name, when the hum grew faint again. Not gone, just buried like a heartbeat under the heavy noise of progress. The world had become quick and clever once more. Cities stacked themselves higher than clouds, roads glowed, voices traveled faster than thought. People called it an age of abundance, but quiet had gone bankrupt. Nobody knowed it, not really. They were too busy chasing seconds, trading breath for speed. The hum, patient it is, waited. In one of those cities, a glass labyrinth stretching across the horizon, there lived an old janitor named Samuel. He worked nights in a tower so tall that clouds scraped its windows clean.
Most folks never saw him by the time he arrived. The offices were empty. The hum of work raced by the hum of machines. He liked that part of the job. The stillness between hours. He'd sweep the marble floors, polish the brass railings, fix the lights that flickered just before dawn. Sometimes, when he stopped to rest, he'd hear a vibration deep in the walls. Not the electric cuzz of wires, but something slower, steadier, familiar. He never told anyone. Some things don't need explaining. Samuel lived alone in a small room on the top floor, right beneath the roof garden that no one visited anymore. Every night before leaving, he'd take his coffee up there and watch the city breathe millions of lights, blinking in patterns, like a restless sky looking for peace. One evening, as he sat beneath the hum of neon and storm, he felt the ground tremble so slightly. The air thickened, the rain paused mid-drop, and then he heard it clearer than he had before. The hum, not from the walls or wires, but from the sky itself. It rolled through him like a sigh from the beginning of time. He set his cup down slow, afraid to break the moment. The rain started dead, soft at whispers. Samuel laughed quietly. "Well," he said to no one, "it took you long enough." He didn't ask what it wanted, he just listened. The sound wasn't a message, it was a memory. The hum was remembering itself, reminding him that stillness could survive anywhere, even here, at the top of a tower built to outpace the wind. Started leaving small notes in the places where the sound lingered strongest, inside the elevator shaft, behind the boiler, beneath the stairwell. Each note had the same words, "Wait, hey." He didn't know why. It did felt right. Over time, he'd ate that other workers, engineers, clerks, guards, began finding those notes. They'd pause for a second or toss them away, or sometimes pocket them without knowing why. Some even started taking breaks near the quiet corners where Samuel left them. The hum grew louder there, like gratitude. Then one night, the power went out across the city. For the first time in decades, the tower went dark. No hum of servers, no flicker of light, just silence. And in that silence, Samuel heard the hum in full. It wasn't faint or distant anymore. It was everywhere. It vibrated through the floor, the walls, his bones. He walked through the empty halls, each step echoing in rhythm with the sound, down the stairwells, through corridors, until he reached the lobby. The glass doors glowed faint blue from the storm outside.
Lightning flashed, and in that flash, Samuel saw his reflection in the glass. But behind him stood shadows of others, dozens of them. Some wore old clothes, some new, run from times he didn't recognize. Jonah, Cass, Levi, Rosa, Elias, June, all standing there in silence, watching him. Samuel didn't turn round, he just smiled. You've been here all along, haven't you? He answered. You know, and mine in words, but in feeling, warmth, peace. A cane of home that don't need walls. The storm passed, lights flickered back to life. When the morning crew arrived, they found the lobby spot lit, coffee cups still steaming on the counter, broom leaned gentle against the wall. But Samuel was gone. A week later, the building architect, an old man herself, walked through the halls and met something peculiar. The lights seemed to dim softer, the doors closed quieter, and when you stood still, you could swear the walls hummed, like the place itself had learned to breathe. She called it a wintedit, but the janitors who came after swore they sometimes heard footsteps when no one else was around slow. Measured, patient, years turned into decades. The city changed again. Towers crumbled, streets shifted, and nature started stealing back what it once owned. The building Samuel tended became a ruin, its glass broken, its roof garden overgrown. Yet travelers who passed through claimed the air still vibrated there. They'd sit for hours inside the hollow shell, swearing they could hear a low note that soothed their bones. One woman, a wanderer with silver hair and a weather-redder coat, said she found a small note tucked under a tile near the entrance. Wait here, she did, and by nightfall, she said the silence began to sing. Nobody knows what happened to Samuel. Maybe he became part of the hum, same may all the others. Maybe he walked out into the rain and just kept going following the sound till it folded him into its rhythm. But if you'd find yourself in a place that feels softer than it should, where even the noise seems kind, where the air feels like it's waiting for you to breathe before it does, then maybe you found where he went. That's how the hum lives now. Not in relics or ruins, but in small mercies. A stranger holding the door, a worker pausing to look at the sky before the shift starts, a heartbeat that don't rush, little moments of stillness so ordinary they might as well be invisible, but they're not. They're the world remembering how to listen, one breath at a time. And when the last person finally forgets to hurry, when the last machine finally hums itself quiet, the sound won't vanish. It'll bloom, it'll roll across the dust and the sea and the stars, low and eternal, like the universe sighing in relief. Maybe that's the real end of all this, the hum finally finding itself everywhere at once. If you're lucky enough to hear it before then, don't speak. Just smile, tip your hat, and let it pass through you, because that hum older than time, and it's been waiting longer than you can imagine, and every time someone listens, it starts the world over again. Long after Samuel Tower fell and the hum folded itself into the breath of the wind again, the world changed its shape once more. Oceans swallowed coastlands, forests reclaimed iron. The old machines that once screamed in defiance grew still, their metal husks softened by moss and time. Humanity didn't vanish. It scattered, slow and deliberate, like seeds waiting on rain. Small communities bloomed where quiet took root. They didn't call themselves survivors or pioneers. They just called themselves listeners. One of them lived by a river that ran wide and green to the ruins of an old trade road. His name was Abram. He wasn't young, but he carried himself with the strength of a man who never rushed. Folks said he could fix anything, bridges, clocks, even hearts heavy with noise. He lived in a cabin built from the bones of the city that once stood nearby, its walls lined with things the river had carried him, glass, stone, pieces of old metal shaped like stories half forgotten. When the wind passed through his workshop, it made a sound, a distant song. Every dawn, Abram would sit on his porch and listen, not for birds or rivers, but for the hum, the same slow rhythm that had followed the world through every age. It was faint now, like a dream breathing under the skin of the earth. But it was there, always there. Some mornings it felt close enough to touch others, far away the stars. He never forced it, just waited, same as those before him. Travelers often stopped by his place, drawn by rumor. They'd come asking questions no one had answers for. Is it true you can hear the world speak? Can you teach me to listen? Does the hum still forgive? Abram never promised miracles.
He'd hand him tea, sit him down, and let silence do most of the talking. After a while, most left with tears they didn't expect. They could quiet and wash something out of them they didn't know was dirty. You don't sell peace here, one visitor said once. Abram just chuckled. Wouldn't fetch a good price if I did. Peace don't belong to me. One autumn, a young girl came down the road, barefoot and carrying a cracked old flute. Said she was following the river sound. It told me to come me, she said. Abram smiled, gesturing her inside. Then I reckon you better play. She lifted the flute and blew, but no sound came out, just a faint breath that fluttered like dust in light. She looked embarrassed. It broken? Abram said softly. It's just waiting on you to remember what quiet feels like. They sat together by the river that evening, the sky bruising purple with dust. After a long while, she tried again.
Each time the note came strong, not perfect, but honest. The hum rose to meet it, subtle and deep, shaking the air like a slow heartbeat. Her eyes widened. Did you hear that? She whispered. Abram nodded. I heard you. Yeah. The girl stayed with him through the winter, learning the rhythm of stillness. She helped mend nets, clean the tools, and listened to the stories he told, not of gods or kings, but of people who remembered how to breathe slow. Jonah in his field, Cass in her engines, Levi in his bell, Rosa by the lake, Elias in the mountain, June in the compass, Samuel in the tower. She wrote their names on bits of bark and tossed them into the river, saying if they're still out there, maybe they'll hear. Spring came gentle. One morning, Abram didn't wake. He was sitting on the porch, hands folded, eyes half open, like he'd been listening to something too beautiful to stop. The girl buried him by the water and rocked the A with a smooth river stone. On it, she carved. He kept the hum steady.
Then she packed her flute and walked upriver, following the current the way it once followed her. Years passed, and people spoke of the girl who played for Rivers, said when she played, the fish rose to the surface to listen, said the wind bent around her tune. They made her the Echo Daughter. She never settled, never sought fame or crowd. She'd play at night near ruins and wells, her melody mingling with the hum of a thread of light through dark fabric. Those who heard her swore they slept better after, like the world had forgiven itself for running so long. One stormy night she reached the sea. The waves were wild, crashing against the bones of old ships, but the hum was there, stronger than none, riding through the thunder like laughter from the deep. She stood on the cliffs, rain drenching her, and raised the flute one last time. The note she played was pure enough to stop the wind for a heartbeat. When it faded, the hum echoed back, soft and endless, stretching to the horizon. The girl smiled, set the flute down on the rock, and walked into the rain till the world swallowed her shape. Come morning, the storm had passed. Fishermen found her flute, dry they bone despite the sea rage. They left it vague, saying it belonged to the wind now. But sometimes when the tide right and the dawn slow, that same note rises from the cliffs, thin, trembling true. The sea hums back, and for a moment the whole world seems to pause and listen. Maybe the hum ain't just sound anymore. Maybe it's the shape of care itself, the pause before we speak, the space we leave for one another to breathe. It's the small, invisible kindness that keeps the world from raking. Maybe every time someone stops to listen, to the rain, to the river, to a heartbeat, they're keeping the old promise alive that no matter how loud life gets, quiet will always find a way home. So if you will pass a river and hear a faint tune that makes you slow your step, don't look for where it's milking from. Just take off your hat, bow your head, and whisper thank you. You'll be speaking to every soul that waited long enough to hear the hum again. They used to say the horizon couldn't be owned. The man could chase it in his life and never catch it, no matter how much land he bought or how far he rode. But I knew a man who came damn close. Name was Cold Hash Lorette. Quiet fella, all dust and slow drawl, the kind of man who made silence feel like a conversation. I met him once years back out by the river settlements when the gold rush was dying and hope was worth less than a coin worn smooth by passing hands. He was sitting by a half-dead fire polishing an old compass that didn't mean to pote anywhere. I asked him what he was doing out there alone, and he said, counting what mine. When I looked around, all I saw was dirt and sky. I don't see much to count, I said. He smiled small like a man remembering a private joke. That's what everyone says till they learn what counts. Now, I ain't one for tall tales, but I'll tell you what I learned sitting with cold catlight. The man wasn't rich when he started. Hell, he wasn't even lucky. Just another ranch hand chasing wages and whiskey drifting from one busted fence to the next. But there was something about him even then, something that made time slow down when he talked. He had a way of looking past things, like he was measuring not what was there, but what could be. Back in those days, the frontier was hungry. Land was selling cheap, water was scarce, and most folks were too busy grabbing what they could see to notice what they couldn't. Not Cola. He used to say, wealth ain't in what you grab, it in what you wait for. That sounded foolish to most. But patience was his pickaxe and faith was his shovel. Took him farther than gold did. You see, the first piece of land he bought wasn't worth a nickel on paper. It was a flat stretch of nothing dirt, sagebrush, and a dry creek that hadn't seen rain in a decade. The seller laughed when Cola handed him the deed money. "You're buying the ghost of a river," the man said.
Colby nodded. "Ghosts come back if you wait long enough." He spent the first year living in a shack he built himself, patching sheet with old tin and faith. He'd walk that dry creek bed every morning, boots leaving prints that the wind would erase before noon. Neighbors thought him mad, but he wasn't waiting for rain. He was listening. He once told you there a hum beneath every piece of land, a sound the earth makes when it's ready to change. He said if you listen long enough, you can hear what life wants to return. Took him 3 years to find it. One summer afternoon, he dug deep in the bend of that dry river and hit something damp. By fall, he'd found an underground spring, cold and clear, ed forgiveness. By the next spring, that dead land bloomed. Grass came first, then trees, then cattle. Folks thought that was a miracle. Colby called it patience collecting its interest. He didn't sell the land right away. He let it grow, letting the water find its own rhythm. When the drought hit 2 years later, every ranch for 50 miles went brown except his. That when buyers came knocking. Could named any price, and they'd have paid it. But Colby didn't sell the land. In sold the water right. Kept the ground, sold the flow. That was the first time anyone around those parts learned what real wealth looked like. While others chased gold, Colby sold the promise of it. He turned scarcity into supply, and by the time the rains came a bend, he'd already made enough to buy half the valley. But 'tis the thing he never spent like a rich man, wore the same hat, rode the same horse, fixed his own fences. When I asked him why, he said, "I ain't the things you own that'll buy you freedom. It's the things you don't need anymore." There was talk of him turning into a sign of tycoon, buying up land, renting it back to those who laughed at him. But that wasn't his way. Calder wasn't building an empire, he was building a horizon. Said to me once, "Most folks think the horizon where the world ends, but it ain't. Where the world begins for the ones who keep walking the way." Started a school of sorts. Not the kind with books and desks, but one with wind, soil, and patience and teachers. He took in young ranchers and miners who lost everything, taught them how to read the ground like scripture. He showed them how to trade steady for quick, how to listen for what the world was whispering instead of what men were shouting. By the time the railroad came through, Coleman owned no banks, no gold mines, no ships, but he owned something rarer, time. Folks would pass him riding slow on his mule, tip their hats, and call him the man who sold the horizon. He'd just nod and say, "Didn't sell it, just showed folks it was already theirs." I reckon if there's a lesson in his story, this riches ain't what fill your pockets, they're what fill the quiet when you finally stop running. Cole Merrick didn't buy the world, he just learned to wait till the world came back around to him. Years passed and the legend of Cole Merrick spread far beyond the valley. Some call him a prophet of patience, others a fool who got lucky once and mistook it for wisdom. Colby didn't much care which story folks told. He'd sit on his porch with a coffee cup gone chipped from use, watching the sun crawl up the same ridge he'd watched for 20 years, and smiled like a man who knew the secret wasn't in the climb, it was in the sitting. He never had a family of his own, said the land was enough company and the wind knew all the right things to say. But he did have visitors, young men mostly, prospectors, ranch hands, and sometimes even city folk with soft hands and hungry eyes. They came to learn the Colby method, they called it. Thought maybe there was a formula, a blueprint, a way to turn dirt into fortune if they just listened close enough. He'd let them talk, let them draw their fancy charts and wave their ledgers around, then pour them coffee and ask yet one question. "What do you reckon patience pays?" That question stopped most of them cold.
They'd stammer out something about interest or yield, but Colby would shake his head. "Patience don't pay in coin," he'd say. "It pays in time, and time the no thing that don't lose value when the markets crash." Most folks left after that, figuring he was talking riddles, but a few stayed. He took those ones under his wing, made him plant windbreaks, mend fences, dig irrigation lines, sit under the sky, and count the minutes between bird songs. It was not about farming or building. It was about learning how to wait. That was his trade, his craft. He called it the slow business. One of those apprentices was a boy named Silas Dorn, barely 20 when he showed up, then a whip, and twice said restless. Came from a family that lost everything to bad loans and worse weather. Silas wanted revenge on the world, not wisdom. Said he wanted to get rich fast, make the land pay for all it took. Colby just smiled and said, "You can't make the earth hurry, son. It don't speak that language." Silas stayed anyway, maybe because he had nowhere else to go, maybe because something in Colby quiet unsettled him.
At first, he worked like a man trying to outrun his own shadow. Dug too deep, worked too late, got mad when the results didn't show fast enough. But Colby never scolded him, just worked beside him, steady as rain on a roof.
You'll figure it out, he'd say.
Once you stop counting what you can see, it took Silas nearly 2 years before he understood what that meant. One dry season, the crops withered early, and most of the young hands packed up and left. Silas was ready to do the same, but Cole stayed put. He walked the edge of the field one evening, listening to the wind whistle low between the stalks, then smiled. "Hear that?" he said. "The earth breath in the air. She resting before the rain." Sure enough, a week later the skies broke open, the river swelled, the ground drank deep, and the fields came back stronger than before. Silas just stared, mouth open. "How'd you know?" he asked. Cole chuckled. "Didn't know. I just didn't forget to listen." After that, Silas changed. He started rising earlier, working slower, speaking less. He began keeping a small ledger, not for profits or losses, but for lessons. Patience, day 49. One entry read, "Wind smells like rain, but the ground's still humming dry. Wait another day, another read. Never trade peace for progress. Amon." Both don't live long in the same house. Colby found the boy notes one day and smiled proud. "You're learning," he said. "Soon you'll know what to sell." "What's that?" Silas asked. Colby leaned back, looking out toward the far hills. "Not land, not water. Understanding, sell that, and folks will pay more than they would for gold." The years rolled gentle like a slow river. Silas grew into a man with Colby's same calm about him. When the railroad men came through offering to buy the valley outright, it was Silas who stood beside Colby and said, "You can't sell what don't belong to you." They both laughed afterward, sitting by the fire. "You sound older than me," Cole teased. "That's your fault," Silas said. "But I'm a trader with no mercy, and even the patient can't bargain forever." One winter, Colby took ill. The doctor from town came up once, looked one look, and shook his head. His body had tired at the land after harvest, he said. "Best thing you can do is let him rest." Colby didn't fight it. Spent his last week sitting in that same porch chair, eyes on the horizon, hand wrapped around a coffee cup gone cold. Silas sat beside him most nights, neither saying much, just the wind and the slow rhythm of life drawing down. One evening, Cole spoke up, voice low be dusk. "Remember what I told you about patience, Silas?" The younger man nodded. "That it pays in time." Cole smiled faintly. "Aye, but there's something else I didn't say. Patience don't just earn time, it teaches you how to spend it." Silas frowned, thinking he meant hours or days, but Cole shook his head. "No, son. Time, the only wealth worth giving. Don't hoard it. Invest it where it matters. People, quiet, something that'll outlast you." He passed 2 nights later, under a red sky that looked almost like dawn. The land stayed still for a day. Then, if it knew, Silas buried him under the big cottonwood tree near the spring, the one that started it. On the stone, he carved just 3 words. He waited well. When Silas took over the ranch, he didn't change much, still rode the same trail, still poured coffee into the same chipped mug. But now folks came from far and wide not to learn how to grow things, but how to wait for them. And Silas taught him, same aid Colby had, called it slow money. Said the fastest way to lose your fortune was to rush your faith. And in that valley, long after Cole's name faded into legend, folks still said you could hear him sometimes out past the fences, wave the sky bent low enough to touch. Not his voice exactly, but something quieter, like the land humming its thanks. Silas didn't ride into town right away after Cole passed. He spent a good while on that land, walking it slow, learning its language the way Cole had taught him. The hills had their moods, the wind had its truths, and the soil whispered back if you were quiet long enough. But time, like an old horse, eventually nudges you forward. So, one cool spring morning, Silas saddled up and rode toward the nearest settlement, Dry Bend, a town that had never quite figured out how to be rich or poor. It just swayed between the two like a man caught between sleep and wake. Dry Bend was changing. The railroad had brought new faces, and with them came quick money, loud deals, and a kind of restless hunger that made the air feel different. The saloon used to A with slow laughter and card shuffles. Now it rang with the clatter of city talk. Men in tailored coats arguing over mineral rights and timber contracts. They divided progress. Silas taunts in noise. He tied his horse by the trough and walked through town like a man watching a river rise too far. Old stores were shuttered. New ones gleamed with signs that promised things faster, cheaper, shinnos. Banks were sprouting up with weeds, each one claiming to make dreams grow quicker than the last. He saw folks signing papers they didn't understand, hands shaking over deals that smelled more of hope than sense. That night he sat by the saloon window, with a cup of black coffee, listening to the rain tap the roof. A young man sat beside him, clerked by the look of him, nervous eyes and fingers that twitched. "I was late for something. You from out of town?" the boy asked. "Far enough," Silas said. "You here for business?" Silas smiled faintly. "Always am." The boy leaned in. "We ought to talk to the men running the exchange. They're buying land rights, promising double returns in 6 months. It's the quickest way to wealth this side of the divide." "Quickest way," Silas repeated, rolling the words slow on his tongue like they were foreign. "You seen a tree grow in 6 months, son?" The boy blinked. "No, sir. Then I reckon you ain't seen wealth grow that way either." The boy looked confused, but Silas didn't push. He just tipped his hat and stepped into the rain. Over the next few weeks, Silas became a familiar sight in Dry Bend. He didn't talk Dutch, didn't buy or sell nothing, just listen. He'd sit on the steps of the post office or lean on a fence, watching men hurry past with ledgers and promises. Folks started calling him the listener. Some laughed at him, others ignored him, but a few, mostly those whose hands had grown tired from chasing the quick daw, began to sit beside him. He'd tell them stories. Not sermons, not lessons, just slow tales about coal, the spring, the hum of the land. You notice he'd say, "How money like water, hold it too tight and it slips through. Let it flow steady and it feeds you twice, once when it passes through and again when it returns." Word got wrought that Silas wasn't just a dreamer. He was teaching something folks hadn't heard in years, discipline that didn't come from fear, but from peace. Soon the same men who'd mocked him came to listen, miners whose veins were full of dust, traders whose ledgers were more red than black. Even the banker who used to laugh at ranch hands now sat quiet while Silas spoke. He called his idea the long trade. It wasn't about stocks or contracts. It was about how a man handled his time. Fast money loud, he'd say. Slow money whispers. And if you can't hear the whisper, you'll always chase the shout. At first, the town didn't take him serious. But then the drought hit. The same drought that once tested Colby patience swept through the valley again. Wells dried up, cattle died, and the men who'd bought fast deals found their paper fortunes turning to dust. Only those who'd listened, those who'd saved, those who'd built slow, stood steady. Silas didn't gloat. He helped. He opened his land, shared water, and showed others how to rebuild without debt. One night, as he was mending a fence under a red moon, the banker from town rode up. The man looked 10 years older than when Silas last saw him. "I came to ask a question," he said. "How'd you know this would happen?" Silas didn't look up from his work, didn't know, just knew it happened sometime. World always been a circle, friend. Drought follows rain, greed follows calm. The trick ain't in predicting it, it in preparing for when it come round again. The banker nodded, his pride finally quiet. "What do you want in return?" Silas leaned on the fence post, eyes soft. "Just promise me this. Teach your son how to wait." The next year, Dry Bend changed. Not fast, slow, steady, like dawn stretching over hills. Folks stopped rushing deals. They fixed old things instead of buying new. They built wells deeper, barns stronger, and friendships that lasted longer than any contract. The town started thriving again, not from gold or oil, but from trust. Silas never took credit. He said the land did other teaching. But one night, sitting by the fire with a small crowd of townsfolk, he said something they never forgot. "Money licked the horizon. You can chase it till your boots fall apart, but you'll never catch it. Better to build your home facing it. Let it remind you there's always more to see tomorrow." When he got older, folks offered to name the town after him. He refused. "Ain't no man name worth more than the lesson he leaves behind," he said. So they didn't carve it on signs, they carried it in stories. And if you ride through that valley now, you'll still find a small wooden marker near the cottonwood tree. Weathered, simple, not much to look at. But carved deep into it are the words Cole once said, and Silas once lived by: patience pays in time. And below that, faint but still legible, another line Silas added before he passed: "Spend it well." The years rolled on, and Dry Bend stories started to drift further than the wind could carry. Traders from over the divide began hearing whispers about a little valley where men didn't lose their shirts in bad times, where money came slow, steady, and stayed longer than luck could. They said there was something different about that place, like the air itself was thicker with patience. One summer, a newspaperman from the city came riding through, said he'd heard about the long trade and wanted to write it up for the folks back east. He expected banks, ledgers, and speeches about economics. What he found was Silas sitting on a porch, whittling a stick and humming low. The reporter name was Andrew Pike.
tried to make sense of it. Mr. Dorn, he said, flipping open his notebook, what a gat it is this long trade everyone talks about. Is it a business practice, an investment system? Silas smiled without looking up. I guess you could call it that, he said. But to me, it's just good living, paying attention and letting time do the heavy lifting. Andrew frowned. Time? Sir, with due respect, time doesn't earn dividends. Silas chuckled. Then you ain't been watching close enough. Dividend ain't just coin. They're crops that come back stronger after resting. Friendships that don't sour because you gave them room to breathe. Even a mind can grow. Interest if you keep it still now and then. The reporter scribbled it down, confused but intrigued. He stayed a few days longer than planned, watching how the town worked. There weren't no rush, no loud barking orders. People moved like they had all the time in the world, but somehow every chore got done. He saw trades made with handshakes, not signatures, loans paid back without interest, because trust was the interest. He watched children learning under a tree instead of in a schoolhouse, listening to old ranchers telling stories instead of reading from books. And everywhere he felt that strange hum, a rhythm between folks and the land that didn't belong to greed or fear. When Andrew rode out, he promised to write an honest piece. He did too. But back in the city, his editors didn't know what to make of it. A town that doesn't gamble, doesn't rush, and doesn't owe. Who'd read that? Burl Wenneman laughed. They printed it anyway, calling it the town that waited. It didn't make headlines, but it made ripples. Soon enough, merchants from other towns came riding out, curious to see if the story was true. Some stayed a week, stayed a lifetime. They found a way of living that didn't rake a man back or soul. They saw that while other towns boomed and busted, Dry Bend just kept going. Its wealth didn't come in waves, it came out a river that never ran dry. Silas never turned anyone away. He'd sit with strangers the same way he had with Cole years old, listening first, speaking last. You don't build a fortune by talking, he'd say, you build it by listening to what don't talk back. One fella named Harlan Voss came from a mining town up north. He'd lost his claim in a cave-in and near lost his sanity after that. I worked hard, going, he said, voice cracking, did everything right, still ended unbroke. Silas nodded slow. That cause you mistook work for wealth. They ain't the same thing. Hard work, the tool, not the goal. You can dig 100 heads and still not find gold, but if you learn why the earth hides it, you'll never have to dig blind again. That hit Harlan deep. He stayed on a hand, then a partner, then a teacher in his own right. Folks started calling him the miner who found patience instead of ore. Years turned into decades, and Silas grew old the way a tree does, stronger in silence, roots spread deep. He didn't keep ledgers or own banks, but when times turned bad, people came to him like pilgrims to a shrine. Not for money, but for steadiness. We can't make the rain come back, he'd tell them, but we can make sure the wells don't go dry. By the time he hit 70, Dry Bend had become a kind of legend. Farmers, traders, even railroad men started borrowing its ways. The long trade spread across counties, turning the frontier into a place that measured value in years, not seasons. Men started saving seeds instead of spending them. Women taught their children that debt was a kind of drought, and patience the only rain that could break it. One day, a young preacher came to visit. Said he wanted to start a church in town. Silas looked at him kindly and said, "What would you preach, son?" The preacher smiled. "Faith and hope," Silas nodded. "Good start, but don't forget patience. Faith without patience is just noise, and hope without work is a hollow jar." The preacher blinked, then grinned. "Mind if I yelled that in a sermon? Wouldn't be worth much if you didn't." That night, the preacher lit a lantern in the old barn and read from coal to stone. Those same words carved all those years old. Patience pays in time. Folks sat quiet, listening to the rain on the roof, and for a moment it felt like Cole himself was there, humming in the dark. When Silas finally passed, the town didn't mourn loud. They lived by the spring and poured a cup of water each into the earth for the man who never rushed a sunrise, they said. His raised sat beside Colby, 2 stones under the same cottonwood tree. The preacher carved the last words himself. He waited well, too, and so the long trade didn't die. It just kept moving quiet a river, steadily bred. Some say even now, if you stand on that porch in Dry Bend when the rain falling light and the wind humming through the grass, you'll hear 2 voices, one older talking about time and how a man spends it. Not every legend needs thunder. Some need patience. The long trade didn't fade when the dust of Dry Bend settled.
It wandered like the wind carrying seeds across miles of open land. Stories of that quiet town found their way to city ears. Men in waistcoats and fine shoes read about it in wrinkled newspapers, half scoffing, half curious. They couldn't understand how a place with no factories, no banks, and no rush had managed to thrive while others drowned in boom and bust cycles. They called it luck. But the few who rode west to see it with their own eyes came back changed, speaking softer and spending slower. There was one such man, Elias Trent. He was a banker from St. Louis, shark bed attacked at twice a cold. Numbers were his god and interest his hymn. He built his fortune on speed, on squeezing every cent till it screamed. But in the winter of his 40th year, the market turned mean. Banks toppled like dominoes, and Elias found himself watching 20 years of work vanish in a single season. When the smoke cleared, he was left with little more than debts and a tired conscience. Somewhere in that silence, he remembered reading about Dry Bend, the town that waited. So he packed what was left of his pride and went west. He arrived dusty and suspicious, expecting to find mystics or con men. What he found instead were farmers with clear eyes, merchants who smiled easy, and a quiet that pressed on the soul like a prayer. "Who in charge here?" he asked a storekeeper. The man just chuckled. "Ain't nobody in charge, friend. You work to love donanas. Yo so that the product was bankable." Edix was plenty of trust, the man said, handing him a loaf of bread and that all the paper we need. Elias stayed a while, trying to make sense of it. He watched trades happen with no ledgers, loans given without signatures, debts repaid not in cash but in kindness. At first, it felt like madness. But the longer he stayed, the more he saw the pattern. Everything here flowed slow but sure. Nothing flashy, nothing desperate, just steady exchange, like a tide that always came back. He started helping out at the town co-op, looting goods, watching patterns. After a few months, he noticed something strange. There was almost no waste. Every deal had a reason beyond profit. A man sold his cattle to buy feed for his neighbor. A woman traded her preserves to fund a well repair that helped everyone. It was not business. It was balance. One heaven, Elias sat by the spring, the same one Colby had dug all those years old, and whispered this shouldn't work. An old rancher nearby smiled, and supposed to, he said, it's supposed to last. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. The sound of crickets filled the air, and for the first time in years, his mind wasn't churning through numbers. He thought about his old life building wealth like a fire that always needed more fuel. He'd spent decades chasing more, but never enough. Here, he saw something different. Wealth wasn't stacked, it was shared. Somehow, it grew stronger for it. When spring came, Elias packed his things. The townsfolk thought he was leaving for good, but he promised he'd return, and he did. 2 years later, with something new in his saddlebag, a ledger. But not the kind he used to keep. This one had no numbers, no interest columns, just a list of towns, trade routes, and people willing to try something different. He called it the Horizon Network. He rode from settlement to settlement, spreading Silas' philosophy in plain words anyone could understand. Trade, slow, work honest, let trust earn your interest. It sounded simple, almost foolish. But folks listened because he didn't talk like a preacher or a salesman. He talked like a man who'd been rich, been broke, and finally found peace somewhere in between. Over time, little horizon circles started popping up, small co-ops, trading groups, even families who kept ledgers of gratitude instead of debt. They'd write down what they gave, who they helped, and how it came back later in ways they couldn't predict. Some called it soft-hearted economics, others called it the cold code. But whatever the name, it worked. Slowly, surely, it spread. Years later, when Elias was an old man, a young journalist came to interview him, wanted to write a book about the miracle of patient wealth. Elias laughed when he heard that word. "Ain't no miracle," he said, "it's just arithmetic with a soul." The journalist leaned forward. "What do you mean by that?" Elias set his cup down. Arithmetic measures what was. Soul measures what will be. You can count coins, but you can't count trust, not till it saves you. He looked out the window then, watching the sunset stretch wide and gold across the plains. "See that?" he said softly. "That the horizon coldly sold thee?"
And coastal scent, but it brought back my time.
When he passed a few winters later, they buried him not in a city graveyard, but under that same cottonwood tree beside the others. His tombstone read on. He shared the horizon, and though the years have worn the words faint, travelers still stop by, some to pray, yea, to think,
thud us to listen. And if the wind right, they say, you can still hear Colte hum, Silas' voice, and maybe even Elias' laugh rolling through the grass, all blending into the same quiet truth that outlived them all. That patience, true patience, don't just build wealth, it builds forever. By the time Elias Trent Bones had turned to quiet earth under that cottonwood, the Horizon Network had already started changing the world in ways he never could have drawn up on paper. Out east, where the air smelled more of smoke and iron than rain, whispers of this slow trade began drifting through factories and marketplaces. Men who'd spent their lives shouting numbers on street corners started pausing just a heartbeat longer.
I wonder what all that Russian was for.
Cities at St. Louis, Chicago, and Kansas City were built on hunger, the kind that never feels. But even there, something small started stirring. Shopkeepers began floating the harder interest, calling the Hereford. They were much at shared storage instead of fighting over it. And in the corners of smoky taverns, old ranchers from Dry Bend told stories of Cole and Silas, their voices gravel soft and true. The men who listened didn't leave with gold in their pockets, but they walked away feeling heavier with purpose. The Horizon Network was no company, nor church, no government decree. It was just an idea, a ghost that passed through handshakes, through the sound of a hammer hitting wood, through a farmer choosing to mend before buying new, an echo real wealth that didn't need to shout to be heard.
There was a young woman in Kansas named Clara Reed, daughter of a machinist. Her father had worked himself near blind building engines for men who sold them twice over. After he died, she took over his workshop, small, dusty, barely enough to keep her fed. One day, a trader came in offering to buy her land for cheap, telling her the railroad would soon run through it. But she'd heard about the Horizon Network from a peddler who passed through the week before. Patience pays in time, he'd told her, eyes kind. So Clara waited. A year later, the rail company changed routes. Her land stayed worthless on paper, but precious in peace. Then came a drought, and folks in her district near starved. Clara started building tools instead of machines, hand-cranked wells, grain sifters, things that made hard living a little easier. She sold them cheap, or sometimes not at all, and told her neighbors, pay he when you can. The land will give it back to me one way or another. Within 5 years, her workshop was a town institution. Within 10, she was known from Missouri to Montana as the Iron Widow, the woman who proved patience could build an empire without taking a single soul breath to do it. One of her apprentices, a boy named Thomas Vale, took her lessons east. He became a teacher, then a banker, not the kind that hides behind marble desks, but one who still smelled of sawdust and coffee. He started what folks later called the Time Trust. No written contracts, no compound interest, just promises and proof.
Didn't land $1 today and you pay it forward to someone else, and you could. The circle never broke, but somehow the money never ran out. Newspapers mocked it at first. Naive frontier economics, one headline said, but the people, they understood. They were tired of promises that came with strings, tired of deals that robbed their tomorrows to feed someone else today. The Time Trust gave them back the one thing no paper could.
By 1912, the phrase Horizon Ethics started appearing in speeches, sermons, and business halls. It meant a simple creed: take what you need, build what you can, leave what lasts. Farmers carved it into their barns, shopkeepers painted it above their doors, school teachers made children recite it in morning prayers. And though most had forgotten Cole's name by then, his spirit was walking proud to every handshake that didn't rake, every trade that waited its turn. But with every good thing, there came temptation. The new world was changing fast: electric lights, automobiles, money moving quicker than thought. A new generation rose that didn't remember the dust, the droughts, or the quiet lessons taught under cottonwood shade. They called themselves progressives, and progress was their god. Patience, they said, was for the poor. Factories ran day and night. Credit lines stretched farther than fences. Men traded futures they didn't own, selling time they hadn't lived yet. And the hum, the old hum that used to roll through honest work, grew faint beneath the clatter of machines. Still, a few held on. In letters passed hand to hand, the Horizon Keepers shared warnings. Fast gains cut deep, slow ones build bones, most ignored it. But when the markets broke in '29, the silence that followed sounded an awful lot like cold lesson echoing from the grave. While cities burned their wealth in panic, little Horizon towns endured. They still traded steady, still land without fear, still fed each other when no one else did. The papers hauled it strange. Why aren't these people broke? They asked. But anyone from those parts could tell you plain, because they never built on air,
They built on patience. After the storm passed, new laws were written, banks rebuilt, fortunes reshaped, but behind all that noise, a whisper carried on. A teacher here, a farmer there, a let tucked into a family Bible, each one reminding the next, thou chase the horizon, live by it. And so the old cowboy philosophy outlived every man who spoke it. It outlived droughts, wars, depressions, and revolutions. By the time another century rolled over, the long trade had become less a method, more a memory, a hum beneath the world-busy tune. You could still hear it if you knew where to listen, in a craftsman pause before signing his name, in a woman's steady eyes refusing a fast deal, in the sigh of wind across land that remembered what it meant to wait. Sometimes that all legacy really is. Not marble statues or gold coins, but the soft elk of someone who once believed that time, properly tended, could make any man rich in the ways that matter most. And somewhere out beyond the reach of progress, a horizon still burned red each evening, the same as it did when Cole first set his eyes upon it, untouched, unowned, eternal. It was the modern age nay, cities stitched together by light instead of dust, glass towers rising where prairie grass once whispered. Folks didn't walk anymore, they hurried. They didn't wait for letters, they fired messages across the world, faster than thought. Somewhere along the line, time had stopped belonging to men. It was owned by their machines. And yet, even in that age of speed, were still corners the old hum lingered. Places forgotten by the skyline, where the wind still carried whispers from older days. One of those corners was a run-down ranch out Amarillo. Nobody paid it much mind, just a weather-beaten house, a barn that leaned like it was tired of standing, and a tree out back whose roots had seen more years than any man alive. That was what a fella named John Markham ended on when the world broke him clean in two. John had been a man of numbers, much like Elias Trent once was. Stockbroker, fund manager, the kind who talked fast and slept light. He'd made his first million before he turned 35 and lost it before 40. Markets shifted, trust collapsed, and for the first time in his life, the ground beneath him felt like air. They drove west, chasing nothing in particular, just the need to breathe somewhere that didn't buzz or blink, and found that old ranch by accident, pulled over with engine, and when the sky was spilling fire across the horizon and saw a sign hanging crooked on a fence post. The paint was near gone, but the words could still be read if you squinted hard enough. Patience pays in time. I didn't know why, but those words hit something deep. He sat there in his car, engine humming, staring at that sign till the sun slipped away. Then he got out, stretched his legs, and walked the fence line like a man walking through a memory he didn't own. An old woman came out onto the porch. Gray hair, denim coat, hands that had worked hard and never quit. "You lost, son?" she asked, voice raspy of the wind. "Maybe," John said. "Or maybe I just stopped running." She smiled at that like she'd heard the line before. "Well, you're standing where the long trade started. Ain't much left of it now except that tree and a few stories. You're welcome to sit a while." He did. She brewed coffee on a wood stove older than him and poured dipped black into a tin cup. The two of them sat quiet for a long time, listening to the coyotes singing somewhere far off. Then she spoke. "You look like a man who'd been hurrying too long." John gave a dry laugh. "You could say that?" "Let me guess," she said, leaning back, chased the horizon, thought it'd stay put long enough to catch. He stared into the firelight. I caught it, didn't like what was there. She nodded. "Most don't horizon. Looks pretty from a distance. Up close, it's just more ground to cover." Her name was Ruth Marek. Said she was a great something of Cole Line. The land had stayed in the family, not rich land, not easy, but honest. She told John the old stories, same ones Silas had told to Dry Bend, same ones Elias had carried east, about patience and purpose, about how the earth don't pay interest, but it never defaults neither. John listened like a parched man drinking. Every word sank deep. He stayed that night in a spare room, the roof creaking in the wind. In the morning, Ruth handed him a shovel. "If you're staying, you'll need to dig." "Dig for what?" he asked. She shrugged. "Whatever you lost what?" He dug. Fixed fences, patched walls, learned to listen, be angry. The work was slow, unglamorous, the kind that don't make headlines or dividends. But as the days stretched into weeks, something inside him quieted. He started waking up for sunrise, not because he had to, but because he wanted to see what the light looked like coming over the fields. He'd sit by that cottonwood tree, the same one still standing, and write in a notebook Ruth gave him. Not numbers this time, thoughts, little lessons. A man can't beat time. He can only learn to walk beside it. Profit fades, purpose don't. After a few months, Ruth passed peaceful in her sleep, left the ranch to him in a will written long ago. Said simply, to whoever remembers to wait, John didn't sell the land. He rebuilt it, turned the barn into a small community workshop where folks from town came to fix, build, and trade. No cash register, no receipts, just trust and time.
Hung groups traveled on the wall with a wooden sign that read, Horizon Works. Before long, the place drew attention. Journalists came, curious how a cash-free trade post could survive in a world ruled by credit. They left with notebooks full, but eyes thoughtful. Some called it nostalgia, others thought it revolution. John didn't call it anything. He just kept the doors open and the coffee hot. One day, a young investor from New York showed up, sleek suit, silver watch, the kind of man John used to be. He walked through the workshop, browsing the shelves of handmade goods and barter notes. How do you make money here, he asked. John smiled. We don't. We make meetings. The money follows when it's ready. The young man frowned. That's not how the world works anymore. John chuckled. That's what they said 100 years old, too. Funny thing is, the world still works. Just people who forget how. The investor stayed longer than planned, helped with repairs, asked more questions. Eventually, he stopped wearing his watch.
Awkward. And then I let you know, Lord, she admitted it. Haven't felt this calm since I was a kid. Of course, we finally stopped buying your piece, John said. Started earning it instead. Word spread air. It always did. Not loud, not fast, just steady. Folks driving cross country would stop by the Horizon Works to rest, trade, or listen. Some stayed a night, others stayed forever. Each one left a little wiser, a little slower, a little richer in the kind of wealth that can't be stolen. So the Horizon was sold again, but not in coin, in calm, in faith, in the simple act of remembering what it means to live at the pace of the wind and the weight of your word. The years that followed were kind in their slowness. The Horizon Works grew like a tree, not with sudden leaps, but with rings of quiet strength. John never advertised it, never turned it into a company, never sought investors. He said the place already had more wealth than any balance sheet could show. Still, folks kept command. Some came looking for second chance, others for something they couldn't name but knew they'd lost somewhere along the road. Artists did various, even a few tired businessmen. Each one brought something different, but they left the same, lighter. By the 10th year, the place had become a kind of modern legend. You could find videos about it on the internet, short clips filmed by travelers sitting under the cottonwood tree, talking about the ranch that runs on time. They said John was reviving old cowboy wisdom in the heart of a digital age. He never cared much for the labels. Ain't old wisdom, he'd say, just human. We forgot it for a while is all. There was a small shed behind the barn where John kept the old ledgers, not of profits, but of promises. Every person who traded, built, or stayed at the ranch wrote something in that book before they left. A word, a thought, sometimes just a drawing. Pages filled with handwriting from across the world. Engineers who'd quit tech jobs, farmers who'd come through drought, widows who found reason to smile again. One page had a child scrawl. I learned how to wait for cookies. John said that one was worth more than all the rest.
Didn't Randall himself a teacher, but people started calling him that anyway. Universities reached out wanting him to give talks about sustainable economics. He turned most of them down except one. It was a small community college in New Mexico that offered to pay him not with money, but with time. A week of silence in the desert and a small cabin to rest in. Now that a fair trade, he said, and off he went. He didn't preach to those students. He told stories about Coles or about Silas, about Alias and the way the world used to hum when folks lived slower. He said the future didn't scare him. Machines will make life faster, he told them. But speed ain't evil. It's just blind without patience to steer it. After his talk, a young woman approached him. She was studying business and data analytics, sharp-eyed, curious. So you're saying we should go back to the old ways? She asked. John shook his head. No, Mom, I'm saying you take the best of both, use your machines to make work, troop, gee, but don't let them steal the part of you that waits. She frowned thoughtfully that hard.
Nobody teaches that kind of balance anymore. He smiled that way I'm there. The Horizon Works grew into something more than a ranch after that. It became a circle, an idea, same as always was. People started building their own Horizon houses across the country. Some were workshops, others were digital spaces. Waste folks shared how slow wealth stories, not about money, but about time reclaimed, crafts learned, gardens tended, debts forgiven. They said it was the world quiet rebellion against hurry. It spread just like before, not through markets or campaigns, but through whispers,
one person telling another they're a better way to live. John never called himself a founder. He said founders built things that ended gardeners this planted and trusted. I'm just another hand on the shovel, he'd say, than the old one that Ruth had left behind. But even gardeners don't live forever. The winter John turned 70, his hands began to tremble. The doctor said it was his heart. He smiled at the news, said his heart had worked hard enough for one lifetime. When he grew too weak to work, the community took over.
They didn't ask permission.
They'd have did what? They'd learned from it. Cooked care, roofs low, shared freely.
One evening the sun melted over the fields. John asked to be wheeled out to the cottonwood. The air was crisp, the sky burning red to old embers. Around him stood folks from all corners. Young, old, rich, poor, quiet, restless, all bound by one unspoken rhythm. Ain't that something, he murmured. The world keeps turning, it still finds time to stop right here. Someone asked him what he wanted them to do after he was gone. He chuckled softly. Same thing I did. Listen, wait, pass it on. He passed that night, gentle laid aside while the wind rustled through the branches above. In the morning, the townsfolk carved a small marker beside the others. No grand statue, no epitaph, just words carved deep into the grain. He remembered to wait. After his death, the story took on a life of its own. The digital age was changing, fast machines thinking faster than men, markets reacting before folks could breathe. But scattered across the world, people kept finding those horizon houses, kept listening to that hum.
In every one of them, somewhere on the wall, hung the same phrase that started it, NSC.
Paysan time. They say if you listen close, you can still hear the sound of work being done at the pace of the heart, not the clock. Hammers hitting slow, laughter carrying long, coffee cups clinking under a tin roof while rain falls steady outside. Maybe that all the long trade was, not a business or a movement, but a rhythm, a way for men and women to remember the time, the only real coin they had. The horizon, well, it's still there, not to be chased, not to be bought, just to be faced every evening with quiet pride of those who learn to wait well. Long after John passing, long after the last visitors at the Horizon Works stopped counting the years, the hum still lingered in that stretch of Texas land. Time had its way of burying stories, but the ground remembered. And it seemed the more the world rushed, the louder that memory became for the ones who slowed down long enough to hear it. Nobody owned the place anymore. And
the property Kate hands a few times, families moving in, fixing up the barn, leaving again, when the city lights called him back, but the sign over the door stayed the same. Weather-worn wood, letters faded but never gone. Patience pays in time. By the middle of the century, technology had turned life into a race. Work was no longer done with hands, but with screens. Money wasn't metal or paper, it was numbers blinking in code. People called it progress. But for all their efficiency, for all their connection, something vital slipped between the circuits. Conversing grew shorter, meals colder, even dreams started feeling scheduled. The hum of the old world, the sound of quiet work and earned rest was nearly drowned out. Nearly, but not completely. Somewhere in the noise, there were still those who listened. A young coder in Seattle who built a small program called Slowcoin, a currency that rewarded users for holding, not trident. An old violin maker in Italy who refused to let machines carve his wood, saying a no algorithm that knows when the grain is ready. A teacher in Mumbai who taught finance by telling stories of patience instead of profit. None of them had heard of Cole Merrick, Silas Dorn, or John Backham, but they were living the same creed without even knowing its name. And one day, like all things that have waited long enough, the horizon turned its head back toward them. It started with a letter, not the kind typed or sent by machine, but written by hand, in blue ink that bled a little with the writer had paused to think. It came from a woman named Mara, who'd bought the old Horizon Works property after finding it listed online for a price too small to make sense. She was a historian, tired of deadlines and data, looking for a place where silence didn't feel like failure. The letter was addressed to no one in particular. Just whoever remembers inside, she wrote about the things she'd found in the barn old ledgers filled with handwriting, the shovel still hanging on the wall, a box of photographs wrapped in burlap. She said the air there felt different, heavier somehow, like it carried stories instead of dust. The internet told her this was a failed commune, she wrote, but the land disagrees. Mara started fixing the place up, not that a museum, but that a gathering ground. Folks came from all over, engineers, poets, wanderers looking for rest from the noise. They planted gardens, rebuilt the workshop, and began hosting what they got horizon evenings, where people sat under lantern light and told stories about things that took time.
A baker talking about sourdough starters, a mechanic describing the patience of tuning an old engine, a widower explaining how grief don't heal, it yet learns your rhythm. And every story, no matter how different, seemed to rhyme with that one old truth: the best things in life don't rush. Before long, those evenings started streaming online, not loud or viral, just quiet videos that spread through corners of the web where folks were tired of fast content and faster forgetting.
People began calling digital campfire finance. Some said it was the return of the long trade. Others just called it common sense finding its way home. One clip showed Morrow reading from one of Silas' journals that she'd found tucked in a false wall of the barn. His words, written over a century ago, read, "Patience don't not build wealth, it builds peace between the moments." That quote went everywhere.
You'd see it printed on mugs, whispered in meetings, posted in forums about mental health, slow living, even investment philosophy, but most people didn't know what it came from, and maybe that was fitting. The long trade had never been about names. It was about passing something forward that couldn't be bought, only remembered. One autumn, a storm rolled through the valley, worst in decades. Lightning struck the cottonwood, splitting its trunk near clean in two. Folks from town came rushing out, hearts breaking to see it gone. But when the rain stopped and dawn came up soft, they saw something strange. The tree hadn't fallen. It stood there, bent but alive, sap glistening like tears where the bark had split.
And from that break, new shoots were already pushing through green, stubborn, reaching for the light. Mara smiled when she saw it. That the horizon, she said, never dies, just changes shape. Years later, when she herself grew gay, a reporter asked her why she kept the old place going. "You can't stop the world from speeding up," he said. "Ain't you fighting a losing battle?" Mara looked past him, out at that horizon glowing gold over the plains. "Maybe," she said softly. "But every time someone slows down long enough to breathe, we win a little ground back," and that was how it kept going, not through money or movement, but through memory, through the quiet passing of one truth across the centuries, from campfire to workshop to digital stream. The names changed, the tools changed, but the hum stayed the same. They say if you visit the Horizon Works now, rebuilt and run by people from every corner of the world, you can still hear that hum. It comes through the old barn walls, carried by wind and wood and time itself. Some say it's the sound of the land breathing. Others say Colby, still smiling somewhere well beyond the horizon, whispering the same thing he told Silas so long gone: "Wait well and the world will come round to meet you." And maybe that's the truest wealth a man can earn, not the kind that counts, but the kind that lasts. When the rain came again that spring, it didn't come soft. It came the way Texas rain does when it waited too long, hard, cleansing, almost holy. The air smelled of iron and dirt and memory. Water ran down the grooves of the barn, through cracks in the porch, across the letters on the old wooden sign that still read, faint but proud, "Patience pays in time." Folks from the town dead inside, lanterns flickering, coffee pots steaming. It thunder rolled slow across the plains. No one spoke for a while. It was one of those storms that for silence. Mara sat near the doorway, watching the rain hit the earth in rhythms too steady to be random. "You notice," she said quietly, "how storms sound at work being done by the sky." An old man near the back nodded. That the sound of the world keeping its own promise. Nobody quite knew what that meant, but they felt it. The Horizon Works had grown into something larger than itself by then. There were satellite workshops scattered around the world, each one run by folks who lived the same creed: slow building, fair trade, and quiet earning. They weren't called franchises or branches, they were hard circles. Each circle passed along what it learned, not through contracts, but through shared story. Every year when the spring rains came, they'd all gather in their own corners of the world, light a lantern, and read the same passage from one of the old ledgers. Profit is a wind, purpose is a root. Both can move a man, but only one keeps him standing. Nobody knew who wrote it, maybe Silas, maybe Elias, maybe John himself, but the words had the weight of all of them. That night, lightning flashed to tide the barn, and thunder spoke like the voice of old gods. Mara stood and told the story again for the younger ones. Some had never heard it whole, some knew only bits: the cowboy who traded patience for peace, the farmer who bought a horizon, the banker who found faith. But the story always started the same way. There once was a man who sold the horizon, and her voice filled the barn. You could almost see them, those ghosts of the past, sitting there among the crowd. Cole with his weather-eater hat and slow smile. Silas, pen in hand, eyes full of quiet fire. Elias watched fob gleaming in the lantern light. John, leaning back with his cup of coffee, nodding along like he'd heard it 1,000 times but still loved the ending. Maybe they were all listening. Maybe they'd never left. Outside, the rain softened. The thunder rolled off toward the east. Mara's voice fell low, like the last few embers of a fire, and so she said, the horizon never truly belonged to anyone. It waited for those patient enough to walk beside it. The younger ones didn't clap when she finished. They sat there, listening to the drip of rain from the eaves, the sound of the earth breathing slow. In that silence, the hum returned, soft at first, then steady. It wasn't music acted. It was the sound of time moving honest. The sound of all those years of waiting the shovel strikes, the heartbeats, the hammer falls, blended into one endless, gentle rhythm. Later that night, when the fire burned low, a boy no older than 12 asked, "Miss Mara, what happens when people forget again?" She looked down at him, eyes glinting warm in the lamplight. "They will," she said. "They always do. But the hum will wait for him. It's patient like that." And it was. Generation passed, the world changed again, machines learning faster, speaking softer, acting like they knew what a soul was. But in small corners, that hum kept whispering. You could hear it in the way a craftsman shaped wood, in the pause for a teacher answered a child question, in the long exhale of someone watching the sunset after a long day of work done right. Was it gone? It had changed form. They built a small museum on the edge of the ranch, though museum wasn't quite the right word. It was more of a resting place for patients. Inside they kept Ruth coffee pot, John notebook, the shovel, and that old crooked sign. Visitors didn't pay with money, they paid with time. Each guest had to sit for an hour, no phone, no talking, just listening to the rain or the wind. Some said nothing happened, others said everything did. One visitor wrote in the guest book, "I came to see history. I left feeling like it saw me." When Mara passed, they buried her under the cottonwood right beside John. The two trees that had sprouted from the split trunk had grown tall and strong, their roots twisted together beneath the soil. A new sign was carved from their fallen branches and hung over the barn door. It didn't say "Patience pays in time" anymore. This one read, "We remember to wait." And so the story went on, told by campfires, shared in classrooms, whispered in studios, and streamed across quiet corners of the web. Nobody owned it, nobody copyrighted it, it didn't need to be. It was alive in every slow breath, every unhurried choice, every moment someone's deciding not to chase, but to stay. The hum didn't fade, it spread. They say that if you visit that land today, stand under those twin cottonwoods and dusk falls and the air cools, you can still feel it vibrating through your boots, the pulse of patience, the rhythm of the long trade, the heartbeat of a world that finally remembered how to listen. And if you close your eyes and breathe long enough, you might just hear the whisper, old in time itself, riding soft on the wind from the west. Don't rush the horizon, son. Walk with it. That the wealth is. Then the wind fades and you're left with nothing but the quiet. But it's a good kind, the kind that fills you instead of empties you, the kind that reminds you that every man's story, no matter how far he runs, always ends with patience begins. And that maybe is all any of us has needed to remember. The land stretched far beyond what the eye could hold, miles of tall grass whispering secrets to the wind, a horizon that never seemed closer no matter how long you rode toward it. They called it the Long Valley now, but the locals knew better. They still called it the Horizon Grounds. Tourists came and went, taking pictures, talking about how peaceful it felt. Some said the place had a kind of magic to it, though no one could quite explain why. But the old-timers, the ones who'd grown up under those twin cottonwoods, just smiled and said, "That ain't magic, son. That memory doing its job." Among those old-timers was a man named Cole Markham, John's great-grandson. He wasn't much for talking about family, though everyone said the bloodline showed in the way he moved. Slow but sure, thoughtful in silence. He'd spent years in the city working as a financial analyst, wearing press suits and talking about quarterly returns. But the city never fit right on him. Too fast, too loud, too hollow. So one day, without much notice, he packed a duffel bag and drove out to the place that his great-grandfather had built the first barn. The Horizon Works had told by then it was solar-powered, self-sustained, connected to the world by a modest satellite link. Folks came from across the globe for retreats, calling it the School of Stillness. There were classes on practical finance, shore-saving, building, investing, but the real lessons were taught out in the fields under that endless Texas sky. They taught folks how to wait again, how to build slowly, how to measure wealth in peace instead of panic. Cole didn't come back to teach, he came back to learn. "I spent a decade calculating everyone else's growth," he'd say. but I never took the time to measure my own. At first, he just helped out with chores, fixing fences, mending tools, learning how to sweat for something real. There was a rhythm to it, one he'd forgotten how to hear. Mornings began with coffee by the fire pit. Days ended with the soft hum of crickets and the creak of porch chairs. He started writing again, little notes in an old ledger just like the ones John used to keep. Thoughts about time, about trade, about the strange weight of stillness. One evening, while watching the sunset, he met an older woman named Clara. She was a teacher from Kansas who'd come to study the horizon philosophy for her students. She asked him, "Do you think this place still works in a world like ours?" Cole smiled. "Evan, what you mean by works?" "I mean," she said, "can patience really survive in an economy built on speed?" You took a slow sip of his coffee, eyes on the burning sky. "Well," he said, "speed builds empires, but patience keeps them from falling." That became the first line of his journal, and it spread across the internet not long after. Folks quoted it in videos, in podcasts, even in corporate meetings. The irony wasn't lost on Cole. Patience was trending, but he didn't mind. Better they talk about it than forget it, he'd say. Months turned into years, and Cole looked to Hostin the Horizon evenings himself. He didn't make notes, didn't preach, didn't dress up the message. He just told stories. Stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary peace and simplicity. The mechanic who refused to replace his tools with robots. The nurse who worked fewer hours to spend more time watching her garden grow. The carpenter who made one tale a month and sold it for what it was worth instead of what it cost. Each story ended the same way, with silence and the sound of rain on the tin roof. In that silence, people heard themselves, and that was the whole point. But one night, something different happened. A young man, barely 20, sharp suit, eyes restless, stood up from the back of the crowd. "This is good for stories," he said, "but the world don't slow down. We got bills, we got competition. Ain't patience just a fancy way of falling behind?" The barn went quiet. You could hear the wind pressing against the door. Cole didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, at the calluses that had replaced the city soft skin he used to have. Then he said, "Son, maybe, but falling behind only bad if you're in a race." The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The words hung there like a spark that didn't burn out. The young man sat back down, and for the first time, he stayed still. That was the moment Cole realized the horizon had come full circle.
It wasn't about building barns or trading goods anymore. It was about trading pace for peace, wealth for time. The hum had found its way back again, not in the soil this time, but in the minds of those willing to listen. He spent the rest of his days quietly, much to John before him, tending to the land, teaching whoever wandered by, writing thoughts in the margins of that ledger. When he passed, they found one last entry, written in a shaky hand but steady heart. Every generation forgets the horizon. Every horizon waits to remind him. I reckon that's what eternity really is, a patience too big for time, and so it went on. The land stayed open, the hum stayed steady, and the lesson, passed down from one patient hand to the next, kept echoing soft beneath the sound of rain. Wait well, build slow. The world will find you when it's ready.
By the time the 22nd century rolled its slow wheels across the world, the old boundaries between machines and men had blurred so fine you could mistake one heartbeat for the other. Cities gleamed of circuitry, all rhythm and reflection, their towers breathing in data the way wheat once drank in sun. Everything was fast, too fast for reason, too fast for rest. But tucked between the polished systems and neon glow, there still breathed small corners of quiet. Little spaces whose time hadn't been automated yet. Places like Horizon Grounds. It wasn't just a patch of Texas soil anymore. It had become an idea, a movement, maybe even a rebellion of sorts. They got it with slow dividend. Not a currency, not exact, but a way of earning that measured value by what it gave back, not how quick it turned. Towns and communes across the world had begun practicing it. Farmers trading surplus seed for time spent, teaching builders earning credit for repairing instead of replacing, and storytellers paid not in numbers but in the stillness they brought to others. It wasn't efficient by modern reckoning, but it was whole. The network behind it, and built on the bones of the old digital economy, was called Horizon Net. Its founder, a quiet engineer named Leon Dorner, had stumbled on Cole Markham Journal one winter night when she couldn't sleep.
She'd been a systems architect for a global trade engine that processed billions of microtransactions every second. One day she looked up from her screen and realized she couldn't remember what any of it was for. Her company had built an empire on instant profit, but she hadn't felt peace in years.
flagpole words hit her at gospel carved in oak, falling behind only bad if you're in a race. She shut down her workstation, quit her job, and disappeared for nearly 3 years. When she resurfaced, she'd built Horizon Net, a digital ledger that refused to pay out instantly. Every transaction took 7 days to settle. The system rewarded consistency, not volume. Folks laughed at first, said no one would did it, but Leanne smiled, slow and steady, like she'd been listening to the hum herself. Patience, she said, will prove faster than panic in the end. And somehow, it did. It started small, artists, craftsmen, small-town growers using it to trade services without the rush of debt. Then it spread to bigger circles, educators, researchers, even in city markets tired of volatility. The system grew slow, like roots digging deep instead of wide.
People began to notice something strange. Without constant rushing, they made better choices. They trusted each other more. They even slept better. Productivity went down, sure, but satisfaction, peace, and longevity, those went through the roof. When reporters asked Leanne what inspired it, she didn't talk about code or math. She just told them about an old story her grandmother used to read by the fire, the one about the cowboy who sold the horizon. They thought it was folklore or rustic metaphor, but to her, it was scripture. I just gave it Wi-Fi, she said with a grin. Decades passed, the world didn't slow all the way down, but it started breathing then. The fast folk still raced, still built their empires of noise, but beneath it, a steady undercurrent of the long trade kept humming. In the great markets of New Delhi, shopkeepers started posting hand-painted signs that read, "Wait well." In the glass towers of Tokyo, executives kept sand timers on their desks, not for deadlines, but for thickening. In Africa's Great Plains, farmers would set aside a field every decade just to rest the soil, calling it a patience plot. One night, long after the networks had woven the globe into one great luminous fabric, a child in Nairobi asked his mother what the word horizon meant. She didn't give him a definition. She took him outside, pointed west, and said, "That's where the world heads its breath." And so the story kept spreading without anyone really telling it anymore. It was in the way people spoke slower, in the way contracts got written simpler, in the way a farmer in Argentina would hum an old tune while waiting for rain. The hum wasn't local anymore. It was planetary. But even in that new world of balanced rhythms and shared wealth, the original horizon ground still stood quiet as it, untouched by the neon sprawl. The cottonwoods had grown massive now, their roots twisting deep enough to touch memory itself. Every few years, a group of travelers would come, pilgrims of patience, and call them, to sit under those trees and listen. They didn't record, didn't post, didn't monetize. They just listened. And if the night was still enough, if the fire burned just right, you could swear you heard a voice carried soft on the wind. Wait well, and the world will come round to meet you. Nobody could prove where it came from. Some said it was the breeze running through hollow bark. Others said it was Coast Ghost, still riding that horizon with his shovel in his grin. But those who'd been there swore it wasn't an It was a reminder that no matter how far we advanced, how much we built, or how fast we learned to move, patience would always be the last and greatest frontier. Because the truth of the horizon was never about distance. It was about depth. It was about learning. That the world don't reward the loudest, but it rewards the longest. And as long as there's one person left who remembers that, the hum will never fade. It'll keep singing under the rain, waiting beneath the cottonwoods, telling every wanderer the same thing it whispered for centuries. Slow down, partner. The sun ain't going nowhere. By the time humanity stretched its reach past the clouds and into the black vastness of the stars, the hum had already followed. It didn't travel through the air anymore. There was no air to carry it, but through the steady pulse of engines, the breath of systems humming in unison, the quiet between transmissions when a ship drifted in silence. Some said it was the sound of the past-riding shotgun beside progress. Others said it was memory itself, refuge to be left behind. The Pioneer Horizon was the first of the deep-range colony vessels to bear the old word. It wasn't a ship, it was a world in motion, carrying 12,000 souls bound for a new system out past what the charts once called the Kepler line. The ship was sleek, powerful, efficient as sin, but painted across her hull in simple white script was a phrase older than electricity. Wait well, no one on board knew exactly where that came from. It'd been part of the ship crest since before the design was finalized. The engineers joked that maybe the artificial intelligence had a poetic streak. But the truth was simpler. Lynn Dorner, great-grandson, an astrophysicist named Eli, had insisted on it. If we're taking humanity beyond the horizon, he'd said, we better remember what the last one taught us. The journey took 15 years by Earth reckoning. The crew lived, loved, raised children under metal skies. They worked by a schedule built on the long trade principle cycles of rest, reflection, and renewal. There were no daily quotas, no profit targets. Time wasn't currency out there, it was air. And so they learned again what their ancestors had nearly forgotten, how to breathe slow. In the ship's central chamber, they built a garden, not for efficiency. It led to more space than logic allowed, but the soil mattered, roots mattered. They called it the Cottonwood Hall, after the old twin trees back on Earth. Nobody aboard had seen the originals, but they knew the story. Every recruit was told it before launch. The tale of the cowboy who sold the horizon, the banker who bought it, and the people who learned to wait. It became a ritual. Once a year, when the ship passed through quiet space, the crew would gather under the artificial lights of that garden and tell the story again. Not that history, but a prayer. Patience ain't stillness, the captain would say, her voice echoing off glass and greenery. It motion without madness, it time moving true. When they finally reached the new world, a planet of red soil and silver rivers, they didn't rush to build. They waited. They studied the ground, the air, the stars. For 2 whole years, they lived aboard the ship, letting the world show its rhythm first. We don't conquer, Eli told them. We converse. The settlers called the place New Horizon, though over time it came to be known simply underground. They built small, low houses, each one facing west, not 'cause of the sun, but out of habit, out of memory. The first structure they raised was a meeting hall, and above its door, carved into alloy reclaimed from the ship hull, were the same words that had followed humanity for centuries. Patience pays in time. The first generation thrived, not in numbers, but in peace. There was no market, no central bank, no digital ledger. The slow dividend had evolved into something purer, an understanding shared by all. They grew what they needed. They traded with care. They treated time like soil. You don't take more than it can give. But humans are humans, and even patience breeds impatience when comfort settles in. A century later, the second colony arrived. They came from a world that hadn't known the hum-fast traders, resource harvesters, looking to turn profit from the planet minerals. They saw the settlers' quiet ways wasteful. You're sitting on riches, their leader said, staring out across the horizon. You could power half the systems in a decade. Eli, great-granddaughter Mara, named after the historian who rebuilt the first Horizon grounds, looked him dead in the eye and said, we ain't building half the systems. We're building something that lasts. He laughed, caught her naive, and started digging anyway. For a time, it looked like he'd win. The ground was rich and their machines loud. But then the planet pushed back, not with violence, but with silence. The diggers failed, the harvesters broke, the sky filled with dust that choked their systems. They packed up furious and left for another world. Mara stood in the empty fields where their machines had stood and pressed her hand to the red earth. You can't rush a planet, she whispered. It don't care about your calendar. And so New Horizon went on, steady as the hum itself. Over centuries, the story of Cole Marek and the long trade became less a legend and more a law. Children were taught not just how to build, but when not to. They grew up learning that silence wasn't empty, it was preparant, and when they spoke of wealth, they meant something else entirely, the measure of a life lived without hurry. When the stars filled with colonies, each with their own speeds and systems, they came to know of that little world at the edge of the chart, a place where time itself seemed to walk barefoot. Some said that if you tuned your comms just right, in the static between transmissions, you could still hear the hum. Scientists said it was interference. Pilots said it was poetry. But the settlers of New Horizon just smiled and said that the sound of patience riding through the dark. And maybe, just maybe, out there among the stars, Col Morek still watched from Mufar Ridge, hat tipped low, smiling at the sight of it, the horizon that finally learned to wait for the ones who once tried to chase it. It was near the close of the 4th century, since the pioneer horizon first touched soil on the red plains of that faraway world, when a team of quiet archivists found something no one expected, a signal buried in the deep layers of an abandoned transmission array, old enough to predate the colony itself. The discovery came not from Mud Grand expeditions, but from a young woman named Iona Marek, a historian by trade and wanderer by nature. She'd been cataloging remnants of the first digital archives that survived the journey from Earth, fragments of language, old recordings, scraps of code. Most were too damaged to read, but this one had a pulse. It was faint, buried beneath static and time corrosion, but when she cleaned it up, what came through was a voice, low, worn Southern, a voice that carried dust in its vowels and truth in its tone. If you're hearing this, the voice said, you're closer to the horizon than most yet. Iona froze. It wasn't synthetic. It wasn't a dramatization. It was real. The data logs dated the origin somewhere around the late 21st century, long before the colonization ships, long before Horizon Net, long before even the School of Stillness. She spent weeks piecing the fragments together, listening to that ghost of a man talking like he was sitting beside a campfire. The thing about the horizon, he said, you ain't meant to reach it, you're meant to learn from the walk. Her pulse quickened and she realized what she'd found. The oldest known recording of Colt Marek, the cowboy who started it. His story had traveled across centuries and light years, changing faces, shaping cultures, guiding the rhythm of entire worlds. But no one had actually heard him before, until now. Iona could have kept it quiet, could have studied it for years, publishing papers and taking credit, but she didn't. Instead, she did what her ancestors always did. She shared it. She sent the signal out through the open network, across every colony and satellite that still tuned to the long frequency, that humble, static-filled channel that carried stories instead of orders. Within hours, the voice of Colby Marek filled the silence between the stars. Don't rush your making, he drawled through the static. Don't sell your time short. You'll make plenty of money, sure, but money ain't the harvest. Patience is. You can't plant a coin and expect it to grow roots, but you plant kindness, diligence, faith in good work, and one day the ground will hand you back something worth keeping. Whole cities stopped to listen. Pilots turned down their thrusters. Teachers paused their lessons. In orbit stations, wait sound was a luxury. Folks huddled in corridors just to catch that voice humming through the comms. It wasn't perfect. The crackle of interference made it ghostly, but that almost made it better. It sounded ancient, that the voice of time itself. When the message ended, there was a long silence. Then another voice came through, fainter, trembling, as if from a faraway X of the same E. It was Silas Dorn. You were right, Colby, he said softly. Patience does pay, but only if a man lives long enough to see it. And then, like a final chord played on invisible string, the signal faded into the hum. The archives had run dry. But that one fragment, those words, spread like a second dawn. In the weeks that followed, every colony under the Horizon Compact declared a new day of remembrance, the Quiet Hour. Once every orbital cycle, at the same time, across all human settlements, the lights dimmed, the networks fell silent, and people sat in stillness for exact 60 minutes. No trade, no chatter, no motion, just the sound of air recyclers and hearts beating. On unworlds, they called it the cola pause. On others, the long breath. But the meaning was always the same, an hour to wait, to listen, to remember. And in that silence, you could almost hear the hum again, not from machines this time, but from the rhythm of humanity, remembering how to be slow. Iona became the keeper of the archive that followed, the Hall of Echoes, built deep inside a mountain on New Horizon, carved by hand, stone by stone. She lined the walls with transcriptions of the old letters, the ledgers, the voices of Silas, John, Ruth, Leon, and every soul who'd have carried the creed forward. At the center of it was a small, simple device, the original data code that had held Cola voice. Lowing Gore, Ed, and we won't. Joel is part one of minds and shouts, but it's first aim at one man and remembering how to be slow. Iona became the keeper of the archive that followed, the Hall of Echoes, built deep inside a mountain on New Horizon, carved by hand, stone by stone. She lined the walls with transcriptions of the old letters, the ledgers, the voices of Silas, John, Ruth, Leon, and every soul who'd have carried the creed forward. At the center of it, it was a small, simple device, the original data code that had held Cola voice. Wasn't big, wasn't flashy, just a worn disc of metal, no larger than a coffee saucer. But when she placed it on the altar and played it for the last time, she swore she could hear not at his words, but the campfire crackling behind him, the wind in the grass, the sound of the shovel digging into the earth. Every horizon, Cole said in that final line, belongs to whoever patient enough to walk beside it, not ahead of it. Don't chase the light, friend. Walk with it. Iona closed her eyes. The hum rose in the walls. The lights dimmed. Outside, the twin suns of New Horizons sank low, their glow stretching long across the fields. For a moment, it looked like the whole planet was breathing in rhythm, in peace, in patience. And far above, where satellites drifted like dust in the dusk, the hum spread one more time. Not that a sound this time, but to lay pulse, steady, quiet, endless, carrying the memory of a man who once sold the horizon, only to teach the world how to earn it back. Some said that was the end of the story. Others said it was the start of a new one. But nobody argued that the hum was still there. It always had been, always would be, because as long as one person anywhere in creation took a slow breath and waited for the world to meet them halfway, the horizon would never end. They say that somewhere between sound and silence, between the last heartbeat of one age and the first breath of another, there's a voice that ain't quite human anymore. Some call it the hum. Some say it the wind remembering what it once touched. Others believe it the soul of time itself, speaking slow enough that only the patient can hear it. Whatever name you give it, it ain't gone. It never was. It just learned how to hide, be hurry, can't find it. And now it speaks, not in words, but in the space between him. It don't belong to Cole Merrick or Silas Dorn or John Markham or the thawed hands that followed. It belongs to every man and woman who awaited when the world told them to run, every craftsman who sharpened their tools before swinging, every mother who planted love where speed couldn't trample it, every soul who learned that wealth ain't gold, it's quiet. So quiet most folks miss it. If the hum would tell its own story, it would start for Colby, for shovels and ledgers, for the first handshake sealed the first promise. It would start where patience began, out in the dark, when the universe itself was still cooling, waiting for stars to form. And in a long while, the hum would say, voice low and endless, watched men make fire, watched them make machines, watched them forget the pause between one and the other. And every time they ran too far, I waited. That what the horizon really was, the hum, wearing a disguise, a soft edge at the end of sight that whispered, come, walk. With me a while. Cola heard it first, though he didn't know its name. When he swung that shovel into the earth, he was digging more than land. He was digging rhythm out of chaos. Every strike was a note. Every breath was part of a song that the world had forgotten how to hum. Silas wrote it down. John built a home for it. Ruth poured into coffee and kindness. And from those small human things, the hum grew louder again. Over time, it passed through wires, through code, through circuits and engines and stars. It hid inside algorithms and whispered from between transmission static, waiting for anybody to stop scrolling, stop calculating, and you listen. It didn't need followers. It didn't need belief. It just needed ears. When Iona Marek found that recording, the cowboy voice cutting through centuries of dust, the hum smiled. Not a person's smile, but a cosmic one, quiet and full of ache. It had waited lifetimes to hear its own reflection. And when cold the drawl filled the air again, the hum spoke back. Not out loud, but through the steady pulse of everything living. See there, it murmured through roots and rivers, through the hum of solar grids and the slow spin of planets. He found me, and I found him. Took a few hundred years, but time don't mind. For a while, the universe itself seemed to slow. Ships paused in orbit, data streams dimmed, even suns seemed to burn a touch softer. The hum spread not a sound, but a memory, remembered by things that didn't even have minds, dust, stone, water. It reached the far edges of mapped space, where human signals went to die. And out there, where no ear could hear, the hum found its first home again. The silence. From that silence, it spoke one last time, not to teach, not to warn, but to thank. You listened, it said. You waited. That all I asked if you could have stood there. On a lonely world at the edge of everything, you might have felt it roll pause like a breeze made of memory. It would have felt like a hand on your shoulder, like the pause before dawn. It would have sounded at home. If then always, it would fade. But that's the thing about the hum. It don't disappear. It just move on, finding new hearts to settle in. Maybe it waiting in a craftsman's shop on a quiet moon, where the man sanding wood slow enough to smell the grain. Maybe it drifting in a teacher breath she pauses before answering a student question. Maybe it riding the wind out your window right now, hemming through the rain. Wherever time slows enough to care, the hum there. And every once in a while, when the night is still and the world forgets itself, you can almost hear it whispering, "You did good, friend. You learned to wait. Now rest a while." They say Iona descendants kept that Hall of Echoes for 1,000 years. They never built monuments or statues. They'd have kept the story alive, not with voices, but with silence. And when they finally left New Horizon, drifting out to the next world, they left a single stone behind. No inscriptions, no dates, just a carved dime, smooth and simple. The horizon still hums. No one knows how long it'll keep echoing. Maybe forever, maybe till the stars go cold. But one thing certain, patience outlives pride. Always has, always will. And so the hum keeps riding through dirt and dust, through light and vacuum, through every breath of every creature that ever dared to stop running. It ain't trying to be remembered, it's just waiting to be heard or did. So if you're sitting by a campfire, or under the drone of rain on a tin roof, or drifting through space listening to the static between transmissions, stop a moment, close your eyes, listen close. You'll hear it. That low, steady hum, the sound of patience itself, keeping time with your heart, whispering in a voice older than fire, softer than sleep. Wait well, traveler, the horizon ain't gone. It's this, rest in a while. They say eternity doesn't end, as it changes tempo. And somewhere in that quiet eternity, beyond the reach of charts and stars, the hum learned to slow even further until it became something gentle and still, a heartbeat between worlds, not a sound you could measure, not a vibration you could trace, but a rhythm felt in the bones of things, the soft pulse of patience woven into the fabric of time itself. 1 billion years passed, suns burned out, galaxies folded, civilizations rose like wildflowers and fell like dust on the wind. The names were forgotten: Colpete, Silas, John, Mara, Iona. But the lesson they carried had sunk deeper than memory. It had become instinct. Wherever life took root, it seemed to pause before growing, as if remembering something older than itself. A cosmic breath between heartbeats, a hum. On a distant blue-white planet orbiting a dying star, a new kind of being walked half flesh, half light, minds broad enough to remember planets, hearts calm enough to wait through centuries. They called themselves the listeners. They didn't speak often, and when they did, it was in tones long and slow, each word rolling out at wind over tall grass. They built no empires, no markets. They traded not goods, but moments, an hour of stillness for a memory, a day of work for a song sung soft at dusk. Their historians didn't write books, they wrote silences. Each one was different, some filled with warmth, and with ache, and with the kind of peace you can only earn by losing things slowly. And in those silences, if you stood long enough, you could hear it, the hum faint but steady, like a lantern flickering against eternity. One day, a young listener named Aeon, barely a century old by their reckoning, asked the elder beside the river, "Why do we wait for nothing? There's no world left to save, no storms to weather. Why do we keep the silence?" The elder, her eyes silver weak the first frost, smiled and said, "Because the horizon might still be listening." Aeon didn't understand, not yet. But that night, when the twin moons rose, he sat by the shore and listened the way the elders taught him, not with ears, but with his whole being. The river murmured, the wind sighed, the stars blinked slow and eyelids, and somewhere between those breaths, he heard it, a whisper so old, it could have been the voice of creation itself. "Wait well, traveler," it said, "you've carried me farther than I had dreamed." Aeon breath caught. He could feel the hum vibrating through the water, through his hands, through the pulse that wasn't quite blood anymore. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. Gentle, patient, infinite. He bowed his head, not out of worship, but recognition. "Are you the horizon?" he whispered. The hum answered not with words, but warmth. A memory filled him, a flash of a man with a weather hat digging earth under a red sunrise, a shovel gleaming with honest sweat, a laugh echoing across endless plains. Then another image, hands writing in ink, a coffee pot hissing, rain tapping on an old tin roof. Then stars, machines, colonies, all carrying that same low rhythm forward. Aeon wept, though he didn't know why. The hum wasn't a god, it was a promise kept. When he opened his eyes, dawn had come, soft, pale, quiet. He stood and faced the horizon. It didn't look like an edge anymore. It looked like a circle looping back on itself, meeting him mid he started. And in that moment he understood what every generation before him had been trying to learn, that the horizon ain't a destination, it a conversation between time and patience, between what was and what waits. Aeon walked back to the village, and for the first time in 1,000 years he broke the silence. His voice rolled across the valley like thunder remembered. "The horizon spoke," he said, "and it thanked us for waiting." From that day on, the listeners added one more silence to their collection, the long pause. It was the quiet you keep not out of duty, but gratitude. They passed it down across eons, their children learning to hum softly under their breath while watching the sunrise. And that hum, that simple rhythm, became the heartbeat of the universe itself. Long after even the listeners were gone, when stars cooled and light bent back upon itself, the hum remained softer now, slower, woven into the very spin of atoms. And if you could have stood at the end of all things, when time itself exhaled and the last spark flickered out, you would have still heard it, faint and kind, wait well. And maybe, just maybe, that was the toit of it. The cowboys, the bankers, the teachers, the dreamers, they weren't just building barns or colonies or futures, they were building space for stillness, a place in the fabric of forever where patience could rest its head. And now, with everything folded back into silence, the hum could finally sleep. But before it did, it whispered one last time into the dark, soft, grateful, eternal, "Thank you for waiting. I'll see you at the next horizon." And somewhere beyond the edge of what used to be, something new stirred, a pulse, a note, a spark. The hum began then. Because even eternity, it seems, can't resist the beauty of tighten over slow. And so the hum slept. Though sleep ain't quite the right word for it. It wasn't gone, it was folded like a map tucked in the pocket of the cosmos, waiting for someone curious enough to unfold it then. There were no suns left to warm it, no planets to edit, no winds to carry it, only the black, thick, and endless, the kind of silence that could drive a lesser thing mad. But patience don't go mad, patience waits, and waiting is what the hum did best. A long while passed, longer than calendars could measure. Time itself had gone thin, stretched so far it barely remembered what counting meant. Space was still, quiet, wrapped in its own breath, and then something moved, just a tremor at first. A flicker of light was there shouldn't have been any, a ripple across the fabric of nothing. The hum stirred, slow and ancient, like an old hand reaching for the shovel one last time. It wasn't a star that was born this time, it was something smaller, softer, a pulse. A fine rod humming up from the dark, carrying no words, no will, just memory. That memory became heat, that heat became motion, and from that motion the universe shuddered awake. The hum didn't start the new creation, it became myth. The breath of patience turned into the heartbeat of a brand new cosmos. And when the first spark split into two, and those two into a min, the hum was there in each one. In the rhythm of particles dancing toward each other, in the slow stretch of space making room for life. Creation didn't roar this time, it exhaled. Gentle, measured, steady. Somewhere in that newborn expanse, time began to get. Not in seconds or years, but in pulses. The heartbeat of the hum. Slow a dawn. Planets began to cool. Stars flickered alive, but they weren't greedy for brilliance the way the old ones had been. They glowed warm, soft, content to shine instead of burn. Even the galaxy spiraled with grace, not in the wild chaos of youth, but in the practiced patience of memory. And in one corner of that young universe, so quiet it might have been overlooked by the prudest gods, something of life began to.
Didn't crawl from oceans this time, they're blown from stone and shadow shaped by sound instead of touch. The first beings of this new age were born listening. They didn't speak, not at first, they did heard. The hum filled their world like air, like light, teaching them rhythm or language. They moved slow, deliberate, each motion in time with the pulse of the universe itself. They made themselves the stewards. They didn't know where the hum came from, they didn't worship it either. They simply lived by it, the way a man breathes without thinking. Their cities, if you could call them, that were circles of stone and glass that sang when the wind passed through them. Their art was silent, shaped into form. Their trade wasn't for gold or grain, but for stillness. A steward could spend a lifetime crafting a single moment of silence so perfect, so whole, that standing within it made you forget what rush had felt like. Over countless cycles, the stewards grew wise. They studied the stars and found that each one vibrated in the same slow rhythm, the same hum.
And from that they learned their greatest truth, that patience wasn't something the universe taught them, it was something they remembered. Buried in their very bones was the memory of all who'd come before. The cowboys, the dreamers, the colonists, the listeners, every one of them echoing through time, not hand people, but the rhythm. In that revelation, one young steward, a wanderer named Kael, took it upon himself to find the source. He believed the hum must come from somewhere, a place deeper than matter or light. He built a vessel not of metal but of resonance, a ship that moved by harmony, drifting through the void not by force but by frequency. As he left his world, the other stewards watched him fade into the stars, humming their blessings in the old way, slow, steady, endless. Kael traveled farther than any being had before,
through nebulae that sang in violet tones, through black cat that breathed like sleeping giants. He followed the hum wherever it was strongest, and with each passing century, he found it growing clearer, like footsteps on a long-forgotten trail. Finally, at the edge of all creation, he found it. Not a place, not a person.
Just a shimmer of light shaped like a horizon, stretching from one eternity to the next, and from within it came that same voice, worn and warm be axe, carrying dust and stars in equal measure. Well, I'll be it said, slow in dawn. Took you long enough. Kel bowed his head. You're the hum. The voice chuckled. Been taught worse, but I reckon I'm just what left of what good. The part of time that refused to hurry. Kel wanted to ask questions, where it came from, what it meant, but the hum stopped him gently. Don't ruin it with understanding, son. Some things just are. And for the first time since the beginning of beginnings, Kel didn't think, he just listened. The hum swelled around him, full of every sound that mattered. The strike of cold shovel, the creak of John porch chair, the sigh of Mara Cottonwoods, the crackle of every campfire that had warmed the tired soul. The past and the present weren't separate anymore. They were one long song, finally complete. Kel smiled, and in that smile the universe smiled back. What happens now, he asked.
The hum answered the old way it ended. Soft, eternal, kind, we wait, partner. Wait for the next world to learn how to listen. And so Kel joined the horizon. The hum deepened. The circle began again. Somewhere in the dark, a new spark flickered, carrying that same rhythm forward, quiet, patient, infinite. Because the horizon never ends, it just keeps waiting for company. And in the long calm that followed Kel joining, the horizon itself began to breathe. It had never been alive in the way men reckon life, no heart, no lungs, no name, but it was aware. It felt every note of patience that had been struck, every small mercy that had rippled through time. It remembered the first shovel that broke earth and the last silence before the stars were born again. It remembered waiting. That was its nature, to stretch, to receive, to rest between what is and what will be. The hum that had once been soft and secret began to glow. Not a sound anymore, but a shimmer of rhythm. It rolled through the new galaxies like light bending through water. Where it passed, chaos slowed. Matter organized itself in gentle spirals. Stars formed slower, burning cooler, longer. Planets circled their suns in haste, but in grace, their orbits human the same old tune that once drifted across Texas plains under a cottonwood shade. The universe had learned patience at last, and it showed in the way it breathed. Kel consciousness, if that what you could still call it, rested within that glow. He didn't think in words anymore, but in pulses. He could feel the hum speaking through him, not to him. And within those pulses, echoes stirred. The old names, the old souls, not ghosts, but memories folded in time, like seeds waiting for the next spring. Each one shimmered for a heartbeat, whispering its last line.
Silas' voice came first, low and tired but sure. We traded worry for work and found peace in the bargain. Then John, every man horizon is built on how he treats his weight. Then Ruth, pour in warmth into the dark. No cup but runs empty if you pour slow. Then Mara, the land remembers what patience taught it. And finally, Coldy, laugh easy, human and age late. Reckon we made it further than I thought. Their echoes mingled, and the hum wove him into something, the harmony without end, a choir made of time. The horizon sang, not with words but with memory, and that song became the backbone of the next universe. It wasn't just sound, it was structure. Every new law of physics hummed in tune with that rhythm. Every spark of creation carried it forward. The hum had become the blueprint for existence. A billion cycles later, in that same new universe, another world formed. A green-blue sphere with oceans that shivered like laughter, and clouds that rolled slow, deliberate, and kind. It wasn't Earth, but it remembered Earth. Somewhere deep in its soil, the hum had left a trace, a memory of hands building, digging, planting, waiting.
And when the first living thing breathed, the creature small, a grain of dust, it did so in time with the hum. The rhythm had found a home again. From that creature came others, and from them, stories. The first minds that could dream started dreaming of horizons, not because they'd seen one, but as the hum whispered it into their bones. They'd stand on the ridges of their little worlds, staring at the line where sky met earth, and feel a pull gentle, inviting, a promise older than creation. Walk with me a while. And so they did. They built slowly, learned carefully. They discovered language not that a tool of command, but that a way to share silence. When they learned to trade, they did it by trust. When they built homes, they left space between them so the wind could still sing. They didn't rush their progress. They courted it, like a partner in a slow dance. Their first written law was simple.
Patience keeps the world turning. Their elders taught the children that the hum wasn't a god, wasn't a force, it was a way. The way of waiting, they called it, a covenant between life and time. And when they prayed, they didn't beg or boast. They sat under the open sky and listened. Sometimes the hum answered, sometimes it didn't, but always the silence after felt holy. Generation passed. The beings grew wiser, taller, quieter. They learned to travel the stars, but never too far. They planted life on other worlds, leaving small stone circles behind markers that hummed faintly when touched. Those stones bore no words, only a symbol, a horizon line with a single rising sun above it, and beneath that symbol always the same inscription etched in languages that hadn't even been invented yet. Wait? Well, by then the story of Kolmarek was older than the galaxies themselves, yet somehow still alive. Not in words, not in books, but in rhythm. When children on that far world grew restless, their parents would hum to them softly, the same melody that had crossed centuries of fire and dust. When builders laid the first stones of new cities, they'd pause between each strike to match the hum heartbeat. When lovers parted or returned, they'd whisper to each other, "See you at the horizon?" And one night, when the sky was clear and the air still, a traveler paused by a river under that alien moon. He looked up at the stars, the same pattern that had once shone over Texas, and asked the wind the oldest question there is. Where does the horizon end? The wind answered, low and familiar, "It don't, son. It just keeps waiting till you're ready." In that moment, the traveler smiled, because though he didn't know the name, though he'd never heard the story, he felt it, the hum, steady and sure, whispering through the reeds and ripples. Patience pays in time, time so it did. Again, forever, there a comfort in knowing that the hum don't really die. It just passes through things, like wind through tall grass. That how it always been, quiet, unclaimable, humble. It don't demand worship or recognition. It don't wear crowns or call itself law. It simply is. And through every new dawn, it finds a way to remind the living that things are meant to be slow, that patience ain't weakness, it's craftsmanship. Faith stretched across the length of time. On that new world, seasons came and went in a rhythm so even folks started to measure their lives by it. Every harvest, they'd gather by rivers and hum together. A single note, long and steady, holding space for what they couldn't say. You could walk from one end of the valley to the other and hear it carrying a deep human sound, filled with gratitude for every quiet year that hadn't broken in. Some said the hum was just tradition. Others said it was remembrance. But the old ones, the ones who watched the stars and spoke to the wind, they said it was the horizon itself, singing back. One such old one was a woman named Solena. Her hair was white as frost, her hands cracked and honest from decades of working soil. She didn't own much, just a chair, a pot, and a little stone circle at the edge of her field. But every evening she'd sit there, facing west, and hum soft into the dark. Folks said if you passed by her farm at dusk, you could see the glow around her porch, a shimmer like candlelight, flickering in rhythm with her voice. When asked why she did it, she'd smile that kind, tired smile and say, "Because the hum listens back." Always has, one winter, a great storm rolled in, the kind that strips roofs, bends trees, tests the bones of the faithful. The villagers took shelter in their homes, but Solène stayed on her porch, humming through the wind. Her song rose slow and deep, the kind that don't beg the storm to stop. It did hold steady till it done. The next morning, when the clouds broke, her field stood untouched. Every other fence for miles had fallen, but her stone circle still stood, humming faintly in the sunlight. After that, folks came from miles around to sit by her circle and listen. They didn't ask for miracles. They just wanted to remember what patience sounded like. And Solène told them stories, not of gods or wars, but of waiting. Of digging one good ditch a day, saving one small coin a week, mending one old boot instead of buying new. Her words rolled out like a prayer carved in leather. The hum don't care how fast you walk, she said, only that you keep walking honest. Years passed. Solène grew quiet, her hum fading to a whisper. When she passed, the villagers buried her in the center of that stone circle. For 3 nights after, no one heard the hum. The silence was heavy, like the air before rain. But on the 4th dawn, as the sun cracked the hills, a low tone rolled across the valley. It wasn't wind or thunder, it was the hum, stronger than 4, coming from deep within the earth. and folks swore they heard Solen's voice in it, smiling through the sound. "Wait well, my loves, I'm still here." They waited, and the hum stayed. It filled their homes, their work, their children's dreams. Over generations, they learned to build things to its rhythm. Houses were raised with slow nails and careful hands. Crops were planted not when convenient, but when the hum in the soil said it was time. And when one of their own passed on, they didn't cry too loud. They hummed long and low till the silence took the shape of gratitude. Word of the hum spread far beyond that valley. Travelers carried it to the cities, men and women of trade and reason who didn't believe in such tales. But even they found themselves pausing when the hum drifted through the market air. There was something about it that softened the edges of greed, that reminded even the sharpest minds that value ain't always measured in speed or profit. Some merchants began to leave part of their coin behind at their stalls. The hum share they catered, a tithe to patience, and strangely enough, those who gave never found themselves wanting. Centuries later, the hum had woven itself into every part of that world. Their songs carried it, their speech echoed it, even their heartbeat matched it. When scholars tried to record it, their instruments couldn't catch its full depth. It not sound, one said, the pause between sound, and that was true. The hum wasn't something that happened. It was what allowed everything else to happen around it, but what none of them knew. Not the scholars, not the merchants, not even the priests who built temples to its quiet grace, was that the hum was starting to shift again, not vanishing, just changing its tempo. Because far beyond their world, out past the edge of their maps, the horizon had moved. Something new was rising. The hum was preparing for another turn of the circle, as somewhere in that endless stretch of black, the old voice, slow, warm, worn, spoke once more, reckon it time to start again. The horizon brightened, the hum deepened, and across the ages, from Soleni Porch to the heart of the stars, everything that had waited held its breath, ready to begin. That slow, certain, unafraid, the hum deep shift rolled through the void, that the heartbeat of an ancient beast wakened from a long slumber. It didn't shake worlds or split mountains. It didn't need to. Power that deep don't shout. It whispers, and the universe leans in to listen. Across the stars, things that had grown used to stillness began to stir. Not in haste, not in chaos, just a quiet readiness, a field stretching before spring. Out wet, no eyes had to look. Dust began to move again. It dead slow, careful, deliberate, drawed by that familiar rhythm that had once built suns and tempered storms. The hum was laying the groundwork for something new, though even it didn't know what shape it'd take yet. That the secret to creation, it ain't planned, it patient. The hum didn't force the dust to form, it waited till it wanted to, it sure enough, it did. Little specks of matter leaned toward each other like old friend reuniting. They twined and twirled till heat sparked between them, a small light in the long dark. That light caught others, and soon enough a new flame bloomed, a sun modest but steady, humming in perfect time with the pulse of everything that came before. Around that sun, more dust danced, coalescing into a world, not too big, not too proud, a quiet one. Its surface was mostly stone, washed by a thin wind that carried the faintest trace of music like an echo of Solen's voice humming through the ages. It was a young world, unsure, still shaping itself. But even in its youth, it had patience in its bones. The hum had seen to that. For a long while, it lay silent under its new sun. Then came rain-soft, shy drops that fell for centuries. They filled its craters and canyons, carving slow rivers that glowed silver in the dim light. Seeds born from stardust and persistence settled in that wet earth, sprouting into strange, tall grasses that swayed in rhythm with the wind. They were the first things to truly move in harmony with the hum since call time. When life finally lifted its head on that planet, it didn't rush toward dominance or noise. It grew cautious, steady, respectful of the quiet that had raised it. The creatures there were built for balance. They moved slow, learned faster, and listened deeper than any species before them. You could watch one of them sit under the sky for hours without stirring, eyes half closed, breath synced with the pulse of the land. They didn't hunt for hunger, they hunted for understanding. Every action a prayer of patience. Generations passed. They built homes round and open, shaped to let the wind hum through the walls. They told stories not with words, but with rhythm hands, tapping on stone, feet pounding soft against the dirt. Their songs weren't about heroes or conquest. They were about waiting, about sowing and tending, about the long road between starting and finishing. Every story ended the same way, with a pause. That pause was sacred, the breath before the horizon. And though they never met Solene or John or KL or any of the others, they dreamed of them. In their sleep, they saw an old woman humming beside a field, a man with dust on his boots watching the sky, a voice in the wind saying, "Patience pays in time." When they woke, they'd find the hum stronger in the air, if the universe itself approved their memory. Then one day, something new happened. A small child, barely old enough to speak, wandered from the village and sat by a stream humming to herself. Nothing strange about that, except the hum she made wasn't like the rest. Wasn't the rhythm of her people's songs. It was slower, deeper, ancient, the kind of tone that made the river pause mid-ripple, that made birds quiet their wings. When her mother found her and asked what she was singing, the girl but smiled, pointing at the horizon. "The ground talking," she said. "I'm just singing back." From that day on, the child grew different. Not apart, not above, just aware. She could feel the hum in everything, not just hear it. When storms came, she'd stand in the rain and hum till the wind softened. When crops grew weak, she'd kneel by the soil, place her hands on the earth, and murmur low until the green returned. The elders began to call her the listener. And though she was young, they followed her lead, because wherever she went, things thrived. Not because she changed them, but because she waited till they were ready to change themselves. As the years rolled by, the listener grew older, her hum growing stronger. She could now hear the faint pulse of the horizon itself, the steady beat that had carried Cleo, Solene, Colwady, and all the rest. Called to her, gentle and familiar, like an old song remembered half in dream, and one evening when the sun was sinking slow and red behind the hills, she stood by that same river where she'd first heard it and whispered, "I'm ready." The water shimmered, the hum deepened, and from the far edge of the world, light began to rise, not from the sun, but from the horizon itself. It spread across the sky like dawn raking inside out, painting everything gold. The listener closed her eyes, letting the rhythm move through her till her body dissolved into its sound, turning to light, light turning to memory. The hum didn't take her away, it became her. When her people went to look for her, they found no body, no trace, only the soft vibration of the earth under their feet, humming with a new note, clear and kind. From that day on, the hum had a voice again. It was not just memory anymore, it was alive. The listener had joined the horizon, and through her the circle began anew, to only end somewhere in the great quiet of forever. That old voice, steady as sunrise, spoke one last time, reckoned she the best of us yet. The horizon shimmered brighter, and the hum rolled on, no end, no rush, just the long, patient song of eternity, waiting for whoever came next to learn how to listen. The hum now carried in the listener rhythm, began to move differently, lighter somehow. Like a breeze that finally learned how to laugh, it wound through the New World canyons and forests, slipping between tree roots, curling down mountain peaks, threading through every life it hit. But unlike before, it wasn't just felt anymore, it was heard. A soft tone that came at dawn and dusk, humming steady in the air, if the planet itself had learned to breathe a lullaby. Children were the first to truly hear it. They'd wake early and sit outside their homes, still wrapped in sleep, listening to the hum rise with the light. Their laughter would fall in time with it, each giggle a spark of the same patient joy that had built whole worlds before. To them, the hum wasn't mystery or miracle, it was home. They grew up believing that every heartbeat, every raindrop, every breath of wind carried its song. The elders called this new age the listening years, not because of invention or conquest, but because for the first time in a long while, every creature remembered how to pause. They learned to measure progress, not in years, but in seasons of stillness. When a problem rose, they didn't rush to solve it. They sat by it, humming low, waiting for it to unfold its own answer. When crops failed, they didn't tear the soil apart, they rested it. When a neighbor faltered, they didn't shout. They waited beside him till he found his pace again. Their civilization was slow, but it was strong. Every foundation laid had the hum at its base. And through all this, the memory of the listener never faded. Her name became the way they spoke of grace. When someone showed kindness without reason, they'd say, "The listener walked through him." When the storm calmed or a harvest came in thick, they'd whisper, "She humming close tonight." They built small shrines, not grand temples, just simple circles of stone where the hum felt strongest. Travelers would leave a bit of bread, a piece of fruit, or even a expert into the air. Thank you for waiting with us. But the hum, for all its peace, was never idle. Creation never stops, it takes its time. And as the centuries drifted by, it started to stretch again, subtle at first, like the slow bend of a bowstring before it sings. The stars themselves began to shift, their light flickering in gentle patterns that matched the rhythm below. The hum was reaching outward, teaching the rest of the universe the song it had learned in. Out past the furthest moon, a small comet caught the hum in its frozen body. As it spun through space, that faint tone traveled with it, ringing in the vacuum as sound shouldn't live. The hum didn't need air anymore. It had patience enough to move through nothing. And wherever it drifted, change followed. Dead rocks softened, sleeping worlds stirred, dust curled into spirals that whispered the same quiet vow, wait well. Meanwhile, on the world that birthed the listener, time deepened like a well. Cities of stone and wind rose along the rivers, each built in harmony with the hum rhythm. They glowed faintly at night, not from fire but from resonance, every wall humming the faint pulse of creation itself. The people didn't call themselves rulers or builders. They thought themselves keepers of the pause. Their duty was simple, to make sure the hum never fell silent. Isabel I know one such keeper, a young man named Errol, had a question that wouldn't let him sleep. If the hum is life, he asked the council, then what happens when it stops? The elder smiled the way folks do when they hear a question they once asked themselves. It don't stop, one of them said. It just waits for someone to listen again. But that answer didn't sit easy with Errol, so one night he left the city and walked to the farthest horizon. They, the mountains, met the sea. There, under a sky full of steady stars, he sat cross-legged on the sand and listened. For 3 days he didn't move. On the 4th night he heard it, the hum, faint and fading, and if the ocean itself was whispering its last breath. Pressed his ear to the ground, and in that instant he knew the hum wasn't dying, it was migrating. See, creation songs don't stay still, it moves like a tide, flowing from one place to the next, teaching patience wherever it goes. The hum had lingered on this world for longer than it needed, but now it was calling beyond the scars, way new dust waited to be shaped. Errol rose, heart heavy but sure. He didn't cry or pray, he just smiled. Go on then, he said to the horizon, there's more listening to be done out there. When he returned to the city, he told the others what he'd heard, and instead of sorrow, they celebrated. They sang louder than they had in generations, sending the hum off proper. Their song rose high and long, so pure that even the waves joined in, crashing in perfect rhythm. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a promise. Wherever the hum went, they vowed, not with ships or engines, but with memory. The patience they learned would ripple out, following the hum to every corner of the cosmos, and so it did. Long after their cities turned to dust and their rivers changed course, the hum kept traveling. It reached worlds that hadn't yet seen light, breathed warmth into the cold, taught silence how to sing. And every so often, somewhere in that infinite dark, a newborn sun would flicker, hum once, and start its long, patient song anew. The universe had found its teacher again, and to every student worth learning, it listened. It was said, in the oldest whispers that still floated between stars, that the hum had found its way to every corner of what was and what would be. But truth was, the hum had never been about where it went, it was about who heard it. It could pass right through the impatient, leave no mark on the hurried. But to those who knew how to sit still, to those who understood that silence ain't emptiness, it came and stayed, warm at a friend hand. In, say, distant age far past memory and map, a lone traveler rode through the dust of a planet that didn't yet have a name. His face was lined, his beard silver, his coat torn in, and the places a life gets worn from living too hard. He wasn't running from nothing nor reading toward anything in particular, just moving like the hum itself, slow, steady, inevitable. The stars above were old and faint as the embers of a dying fire. The man rode to the horizon, turned red, then gold, black end. Only when the night got quiet enough to hear the dust sail did he stop. He built a small fire, coaxing it to life with patient hands. The crackle of the wood sounded almost like music. He leaned back, tilted his hat down, and listened. After a while he smiled, because there it was, faint but certain, the hum, traveling beneath the earth through rock and root and ash, humming the same old tune that had carried through countless worlds. Well, he muttered, voice like gravel and honey, I'll be damned. You made it here too. He didn't know the stories of Cole or Solène or the listener, not by name, but he felt they meld the same, like old kinfolk whose faces he couldn't recall, but whose laughter he still remembered, blew a slow breath, and the air itself seemed to breathe with him. You been traveling longer than any soul alive, he said to the hum, and you still sound young. The fire popped, sparks rising to join the stars. The man chuckled. Guess that what patience does to a song, it keeps it from age. He reached into his pack, pulled out a small leather-bound book, edges cracked with time. Inside were no words, only marks, lines, and curves drawn in rhythm, not language. He'd spent his years listening to the hum and translating it the only way he could into shapes that felt like sound. He didn't know if they meant anything. Didn't matter. The act of drawing was enough. As the fire burned low, he began humming along with the earth. His voice was rough, untrained, but true. The hum deepened, answering him. The wind paused. Even the stars above seemed to lean in a little closer. For a moment, there was no separation between the man and the sound. No past, no future, just the steady now, warm and endless. Then the hum did something it hadn't done in ages. It spoke, not in words, but in meaning. The man's heart felt first, like a memory he'd never lived. The hum said, "We never stopped," they grinned, eyes glinting with the reflection of the last flame. "Didn't figure you would." The hum swelled, spreading across the land. It moved through every grain of sand, every buried stone, every forgotten root. The man could see it now, a faint golden shimmer rising from the ground, spiraling around his camp like a ghost of light. And within that glow, shapes began to form, not clear, not flesh, but presence. A woman standing proud with soil-stained hands, a man smiling with the quiet eyes of a farmer who'd found his peace. A girl by a river humming to the water, their faces chased, steady watch, flickering between centuries until the gale became one, a horizon of souls waiting, watching, humming. The traveler bowed his head. "Reckon I've been waiting to meet you." The light pulsed once, as if smiling back. Then it rolled outward, disappearing across the dunes. When it faded, the hum stayed, low and gentle, like the purr of the world itself. The traveler closed his eyes and said softly, "All right then, let's keep walking." He doused the last ember, saddled his horse, and rode toward the edge of dawn. Behind him the sand hummed where his boots had touched, and ahead in the distance the horizon shimmered brighter than he'd have seen it. Maybe it was sunrise. Maybe it was something else. Either way, he smiled. He'd been riding his whole life to find that line, and he knew now what the hum had been telling him meant along. The horizon ain't the end, it an invitation. He rode on. Days became months, months became years. The hum never left him, it lived in his bones now. Every breath he took carried a trace of it. He met others on the road, wanderers, builders, dreamers, and though none of them knew his name, they always paused when he passed. Something about him made the air feel calm, made time stretch a little slower. He'd share a meal, a story, then move on. Wherever he went, the hum followed, humming through the soil long after his horse prints had faded. And when at last his body gave out there on no nameless plain, he didn't fall. He just stopped riding. The wind settled, the hum grew still, and for the first time in 1,000 lifetimes, silence reigned. But it wasn't empty silence. It was ripe, full of promise, like the moment before a seed cracks open. The hum had gone quiet only to listen, and in that silence, the man's last breath joined it. A still note rang out, pure and endless, drifting into the stars. Somewhere, far beyond, new worlds heard it, and after that, the hum began death. It always does. That its secret. It don't stop. It just waits for another heart to listen. The silence after the traveler passing was the kind that made even stars hesitate to flicker. It stretched across that pale plain for what might have been a minute, or at age, it's hard to tell time when eternity holds its breath. The hum had gone still, but not gone. It was like a field under snow, asleep, not dead. Beneath the quiet, something was gathering, not mourning, not ending, just preparing. The traveler horse stood for a while beside his still body, ears twitching at the faintest et in the wind. Then it let out a soft snort, lowered its head, and began walking. Slow steps straight toward the horizon. Every hoofbeat stirred the dust, and every grain that rose seemed to shimmer with a faint tint glow. The hum was moving again, but softer now, humble, wearing the shape of farewell. By the time the horse reached the edge of sight, the first stars above began to blink brighter, one by one. They weren't mourners, they were witnesses. The hum had found its next journey. Out past the curve of the world, beyond where any map or prayer could reach, it drifted, humming low. It carried with it everything that had been patient enough to listen, the kindness of Solena, the steady courage of Cole, the wonder of the listener, the quiet wisdom of the traveler. All those lives folded into one long note, stretching across infinity. Then came the rain, gentle, hesitant, but the sky didn't want to disturb the stillness, but couldn't help itself. Each drop hit the earth and made a sound, and quite a tap, not quite a tone, something in between. Together they formed a rhythm, the same old rhythm that had lived in every age since the first hum. The ground drank it in, and life began to stir again. In the years that followed, if you could still call them years, green began to creep across that plain. First moss, then grass, then wildflowers, spreading in soft waves like laughter spilling over the land. The hum was in and of it, every blade, every bloom. It didn't live in the loud or the grand, it hid in the ordinary. A leaf trembling under dew, a ripple in a pond, the pause between words when two old friends share a silence they don't have to fill. That wet it liked to live now, that wet it always had. And then, somewhere else so far away the light hadn't yet arrived, another world heard it. Not in sound, but in instinct. Its sky cracked open, revealing a dawn that no sun had made. The hum poured through, whispering to the dust. Wake up, little one. The dust obeyed. It dared, stretched, and shaped itself into something new. A new world took breath. Its first exhale hummed the tune of all that came before. From its oceans rose creatures, curious and still. They didn't speak, but they listened. The hum wound through their hearts like thread through cloth. In time they learned to shape it, to turn patience into craft, silence into rhythm. They built their homes not in competition, but in harmony. When one fell, the others rebuilt. Not faster, not louder, but better. They called their way the slow art. And through it, the hum found its newest voice. On that world lived a woman named Mara. She was a builder of vessels, not ships for war or trade, but for wandering. She believed there was a way to ride the hum itself, to move not through space, but with it. The elders told her she was dreaming nonsense, but she only smiled. Dreaming just patience in disguise, she'd say. So she worked. For years, she shaped a craft from materials that responded to rhythm instead of force. When she struck metal, she hummed. When she set rivets, she waited between beats. Every part of that vessel was tuned to the same slow heartbeat that had raised galaxies. The day came when it was ready. She stood before it tall and slender, humming softly. The wind caught her tune and carried it across the field where the grass bent in time. "Do you think you can catch the hum?" one of the elders asked, half smiling. Mara's eyes glinted like morning on water. "Not catch it," she said. "Join it." She climbed aboard and closed her eyes. The ship didn't roar or blaze. It sighed. Light dead around it, not fierce but full. Then, with one long hum, it lifted. The air rippled and the vessel dissolved into the rhythm, disappearing without a sound. For a long while, nothing, just wind and stillness. Then one night, as the elders watched the sky, a shimmer crossed the stars. It wasn't a comet or flame, it was a wave, a pulse moving from one horizon to the other. When it passed overhead, the hum filled the air again, louder than it had been in generations. The elders fell silent. One of them whispered, "She found it." And she had, her vessel was not gone. It had become the hum chariot, riding its current through creation. She saw worlds form, mountains rise, oceans still. She saw civilizations bloom and fade seasons, and through it as she hummed, adding her own small voice to the song that had started for time. Somewhere out there, maybe even now, the hum still carries her tune, a thread of hope woven through the endless dark. You can't hear it if you're rushing. You gotta sit still, real still. Let your breath match the wind. Let your heart remember what it means to wait. And if you're lucky, if the night quiet enough, you might yet catch it, that old sound, rolling soft through the bones of the world. When you do, don't speak, don't wish, just listen, 'cause that's the hum way of telling you you're right where you need to be. And maybe if you listen long enough, it'll tell you what it always told those who came before. Patience pays in time. There were nights when the stars themselves seemed to hum along with her. Long after mere body was gone, her tone carried through the black like a lantern on the wind, faint but sure, soft enough not to disturb the silence it lived in. Wove itself into the dust that would someday become new suns. It curled, dirled the ice of comets, slipped between the folds of light years, humming its patient gospel. And in places where no sound should the reach, it still found listeners. On one such world, half ocean, half glass desert, there was a boy named Elan. He had the look of one born listening, eyes always tilted toward the horizon, hands forever busy but never hurried. His people didn't remember the old hum and stories anymore. They'd long since replaced it with noise machines that moved faster than thought, cities that blinked day and night, and voices that filled every silence before it could bloom into wisdom. But Elan was different. When others drowned the quiet, he sought it. When the city roared, he walked to the dunes where the air stood still and the stars leaned low. He didn't know what he was listening for, only that something out there felt alive. Sometimes he'd sit for hours hearing nothing but the ache of wind on stone, till suddenly, for just a breath, there it was, that low, ancient hum. The first time he heard it, it was so faint he thought it was his heartbeat. The second time he knew it wasn't. The third time he cried. From that night on, the hum became his compass. He followed it through the desert, where glass ridges cut the moonlight-lit rivers of frozen time. He found places no one else bothered to go, ruins swallowed by sand, carvings on canyon walls that seemed to hum back when the wind passed right. The patterns reminded him of something he couldn't name. Not language, not art, but intention, as if someone long gone had tried to record the hum in stone. Elan made it his life work to trace those patterns, sketching them into journals, whispering their shapes under his breath till they sank into his dreams. He grew old by the dunes, gay-haired and sunburnt, humming softly like the tide itself. And then one evening, when the horizon burned gold and the air shimmered like heat dreaming, the hum grew stronger. It rolled through the ground beneath him, through the sand, through the bones of the world, until even the air trembled with it.
The sound wasn't coming to him, it was coming from him. He dropped to his knees, eyes wide, and whispered, "I'm not ready."
The hum answered, gentle as rain on old wood. You waited, that enough. The sand rose around him in a slow spiral, not storm or violence, just motion. It carried his sketches, his words, his quiet life into the air. Every light he'd had drawn began to glow, threading together above his head until the sky itself became one great canvas of light. The hum deepened, its pitch changing. More voices, now all the ones that came before, layered and endless. Elan felt tears burning his face as he looked up. You're real, he said. Not that a question, but a truth. All this time, you were waiting for someone to listen again. The hum answered, not with sound, but with stillness. The air froze, heavy, holy. Then, like dawn spreading slow, a single phrase filled the world. It's your turn to teach. Elan breath caught. How? The sand lifted him higher, gentle as a mother hand. Show them how to wait, the hum said. Show them that silence is not empty. Show them the cost of hurry. And the light took him. When the storm settled, the dunes lay smooth, vague glass age. In their place stood a seed-stone spire tall, curved like a wave about to rake. Its surface shimmered faintly, carved with the same patterns Elan had drawn. The wind that passed through it made a tone unlike any other. Not music, not speech, just the hum. Pure, alive, patient. The city folk heard it soon after. They came in caravans, curious at first, then reverent. They sat around it in silence, and though they didn't know why, they left changed. They spoke slower, worked kinder, waited better. Jenner in turn, the spire became sacred, not worshipped, but visited. Parents rocked their children to hear the hum and say nothing for a while. Builders constructed halls that echoed it, so that even in the busiest markets, a trace of that low patience could still be heard humming under the noise. The city slowed, not in progress, but in purpose. Their machines moved with rhythm now, not rush. They called it the resonant age. And somewhere deep beneath that spire, in the quiet between breaths, Elan hum still lingered. Not the memory, but his presence. He'd come one more verse in the endless song that stretched from Colby campfire to Solana porch to the listener riverbank and beyond. The hum had never belonged to one world or one soul. It was the shared heartbeat of all that refused to give up on time. Eventually, when the stars themselves began to fade again, and even the spire turned to dust, The hum carried on. It didn't grieve the loss, it celebrated the waiting. Every end was just another pause, and the universe, it seemed, was one long breath between notes. It may be, someday far from even that, another wanderer on another nameless plain will stop, tilt their head, and hear it again. That same old hum, low and certain, whispering through whatever remains of creation. Be still, traveler. The horizon not leaving, it just waiting for you to catch up. And when they do, when they hum back an answer, the song will continue, because it always does. That the promise of patience. It don't end, it don't fade, it just waits till someone, somewhere, remembers how to listen. And so the hum wandered on, through endings that weren't quite endings, through beginnings that didn't know what they were. Drifted between galaxies, like a slow tide, soft enough to be missed by those in a hurry, but certain enough to be found by those who'd learned the art of waiting. And in one small corner of creation, where the stars had burned out long ago and darkness sat heavy wie velvet, the hum found a place to rest. Not stop, just rest. Every song, even eternity, needs a breath. In that darkness, there was nothing to see, nothing to touch, just memory. The hum led those memories the weight of every patient heart that had lived and folded them into itself. It remembered colder, long rides, the warmth of Selene porch, the listener river, merrill silver vessel, elan quiet desert. It carried their laughter, their long silences, their tiny acts of kindness that never made it into any record. It remembered the way hands lingered over coffee, the way eyes softened at dusk, the way a person could choose stillness over speech. Those were the true notes of the song, and the hum kept them safe. Then from within that stillness a flicker urdered, not light, not yet, but the thought of light. It was a strange thing, delicate as a sigh.
The hum leaned into it, curious. It found a rhythm there, faint but insistent, the heartbeat. Small, new, unsteady, life was waking again. It always did. The hum smiled in whatever way eternity smiles, and whispered the same phrase it had spoken since the first dawn. All right, little one, your turn. The flicker became a flame. The flame became a star. The star began to sing, not with words, but with warmth. It hummed in its own way, the way of youth, bright and loud and innocent. Around it, matter began to dance again, finding new forms, new stories. The hum didn't lead this time. It just listened. That was the beauty of its age. It had learned when to speak and when to be silent. One of those new worlds that formed was a quiet blue place, wrapped in clouds and mystery. It wasn't special to look at, not yet, but it had a certain stillness about it, a kind of promise buried deep in its bones. The hum drifted closer, not to rule or shape, just to watch. It felt the ocean stir, the wind stretch their wings, the ground shiver with newness.
And when the first droplets of rain fell, the hum laughed. It remembered rain. It had always loved rain, the way it sang without melody, the way it filled the silence without raking it. Ages passed, slow and rich. Life rose again, crawling, walking, building, and in always time pushed it forward faster than it was ready to go. The hum watched deed the creatures of that world discovered fire, words, greed, hope. It saw and chased horizons that kept slipping away. It heard their prayers and their noise and their restless wanting, but every now and then it found one, just one, who sat quiet beneath the storm, listening to the wind instead of fighting it. Those were the ones who heard it, the patient few. They were builders and poets, farmers and wanderers. A woman who sat by a window at dawn, waiting for her child to return home. A craftsman who spent 50 years perfecting a single piece of art no one else would see. A sailor who chose to drift instead of steer, just to feel the sea breathe beneath him. Every one of them hummed in their own way, and the hum hummed back. Small, invisible exchanges between patience and time, unnoticed by history, but carried forever in eternity, quiet legend. Then one day on that world, a boy, youth and restless, stood at the edge of a field, staring at the horizon. He didn't know why, but something about that long line of gold and blue filled him with ache. It wasn't sadness, it's just the kind of ache that comes when you see something so far away and realize it not supposed to be reached, only understood. he whispered, without meaning to. What out there? The wind answered, soft and warm, you are. He blinked, looked around, but there was no one there, just the rustle of wheat, the creak of the earth breathing. He smiled a little, even if he didn't understand. From that day forward, he listened. He didn't rush his chores, he didn't cut corners or speak over others. He watched the world and learned its rhythm. Folks called him slow, said he lacked ambition, but years later, when their fields went dry and their tempers burned, it was his harvest that stood tall. When they asked him how, he just said, I waited, he never knew it. But he was the Hum's newest apprentice. Another voice in the unbroken choir of those who remembered that value ain't measured in speed. His children learned it too, and their children after. Not through sermons or books, but through the way they breathed, the way they treated time like a friend instead of a master. And so the Hum book root again, not that of sound this time, but that a way of living. It settled into kitchens and workshops, into the long pauses between old lovers' words, into the stillness of dawn before the city wakes. It became the unseen rhythm that steadied the hands of anyone willing to move slow. Some called it discipline, others luck, but those who really knew bought it by its true name. The weight, the Hum didn't need to be remembered by name anymore. It had become the air itself. Every generation rediscovered it by accident. Every wise soul passed it on without realizing that how it wanted it, quiet, enduring, eternal. Maybe right now, wherever you are, sitting in your own kind of silence, soaring at your own kind of horizon, you can feel it too. That faint deep vibration beneath your ribs. That whisper that tells you it's all right to move slow. That the world don't owe you speed, it owes you space. That the Hum partner always has been, always will be. And when the Hum settled once more into the soft ribs of the world, it became something gentler than even silence. It became memory disguised as peace. No one saw it coming or going, yet it was everywhere. In the slow sway of a porch chair, the long inhale before a craftsman's final stroke, the pause between raindrops when the storm thinks about stopping. It had learned that its greatest strength wasn't in being heard, it was in being felt. Time, that old patient river, rolled on. The blue world spun through ages of change. Cities rose and crumbled. Names bloomed and withered. Steel turned to rust and back to dust. But through all of it, the Hum never left. What wasn't tied to progress or ruin, yet lived in the quiet corners that both sides forgot to look at. The slow breathing of sleepers, the warmth of shared work, the hush that falls after forgiveness, that where it made its home. There was a time, maybe this time, maybe one decade when the world began to speed up bid. Folks filled every moment with noise, every silence with want. The Hum didn't fight it waited, like it always did, knowing that sooner or later all things run out of breath. And when they do, they remember the song. One evening in a city made of glass and light, a woman named Era sat alone in her office long after the others had gone. Her world ran on time so fast it barely had space for thought. She was good at it, too good maybe. Her name was on the doors, her hands on every map, her mind on every minute. But that night when the lights hummed electric and hollow around her, she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd sat still. Not really. She turned off her screen, leaned back, and closed her eyes. At first, there was nothing, just the restless hiss of machines breathing. Then, slowly, a sound faint, that memory itself, a low-tone reading under the city buzz. She frowned, thinking it was use a trick of exhaustion. But then it rose again, steady, calm, patient. She opened her eyes and the lights flickered once, like they were nodding to her. The Hum had found her. It didn't speak in words. It never does. It just stayed there in the air, filling the cracks in her rush. She felt her shoulders drop, her breath deepen. For the first time in years, she let the silence win. That night, she walked home slower than she had. She stopped to watch the rain slip down the glass towers, every drop carrying its own tiny reflection of the city. For a moment, the world stopped being big. It just was. And in that stillness, she smiled. She didn't know why, but she hummed, soft, low, almost shy. And the Hum answered back. In the weeks that followed, Era changed. She didn't quit her work or flee the city. She simply started moving different. Her words grew quieter, her decisions slower, but her touch stronger.
Next, ladies and gentlemen, who would you sleep?
People began to notice, though they couldn't say why. When she entered a room, time seemed to ease. Deadlines softened, voices calmed. The company she ran became the first in that iron-fast world to measure its success not in how quickly things got done, but in how well they did M. And for the first time in that city memory, people began to breathe again. Ira never claimed to lead a movement. She just listened. When asked how she'd turned everything round, she'd smile and say, "By baiting longer than the noise." Her words became legend, though she never meant M to. Soon others started listening too. Factories slowed their pace. Schools added quiet hours. Markets measured progress not by numbers, but by kindness. The world somehow began to hum again. It wasn't a revolution. It was a return. The hum had found its way back into humanity, like rain finding its way home to the sea. As it spread, people started remembering things they didn't know they'd forgotten. Grandparents sitting with grandkids on porches, singing lullabies without words. Travelers pulling their carts to a stop just to watch the sunset all the way down. Strangers sharing silence without fear. The hum had slipped back into their bones, and with it came peace. But every song has to be passed on, and Ira knew her time was short. One night, she stood on the balcony of her high tower, staring out at the city she'd once tried to outrun. The wind rolled through her hair, humming that same old note. She whispered, "I hear you." And the hum whispered back, "We've been waiting." When the dawn came, she was gone. No one saw her leave, no one heard her go. But in her office, on her desk, they found a small brass key. On it, a single word engraved, "Wait." The workers who found it said the air in that room felt different, warm, alive, humming. They kept the key there, hanging by the window, and when the wind blew, it chimed soft and low, singing the song that never dies. Centuries would pass. That tower would fall, that city would fade, but somewhere in the ruins, the key would remain. It would be found again, polished by a curious hand, and the hum would start over just as it always does. The form may change, but the rhythm never does, because patience, once taught, never truly leaves. It lingers, waiting for the next listener, and so the hum carried on. Through dust and dream, through silence and storm, whispering the same promise it had whispered since time began. You don't have to rush the sunrise. It'll come when it read. The world turned, slow and sure, and the hum smiled through every grain of it. Years drifted over the ruins like soft dust, burying memory but never erasing. The tower where Era once worked turned to bone-white stone, then to soil, then to whisper. The world above it chinked, digging. Machines rose, fell, and rose once more. People came and went, building and forgetting with the same restless rhythm. But buried deep under that old earth, the hum still lingered, patient and dead. It waited through centuries of silence, through wars and winters, through the long night of forgetting, because it knew that no matter how loud a world becomes, it always circles back to quiet. And quiet came, not by choice, but by consequence. The world had run too fast, burned too bright, and one day the noise simply broke. The great engines fell still, the endless lights blinked out, and humankind, what was left of it, found itself facing something it hadn't in millennia, the sound of nothing. At first, the silence scared him. They shouted to fill it, sang too loud, built fires that cracked and roared, but the silence didn't ring. Held deep and steady until that panic wore itself out. Then, for the first time in ages, people started listening in. They found the old places, stone rings, carvings, ruins that had outlasted every empire, and they sat beside him, not knowing why. They touched the stones and felt the faintest tremble underneath, like the pulse of the earth itself. It was the hum, still there, still breathing in the dark. One by one, the listeners returned. Not scholars, not prophets, just folks who'd grown tired of shouting. Among them was a boy named Noel, born in a village that had forgotten its own history. He was curious in the way that patience breeds, slow to speak, quick to see. While others rebuilt houses or argued about the future, Noel spent his days by the river, watching how the water never hurried but never stopped. Sometimes he swore it whispered to him, not in words, but in rhythm. When he told the elders, they laughed kindly, said the river was just a river, but Noel knew better. He could feel something humming beneath the current, old and kind. One night, when the moon hung low and fat, he followed that sound upstream. The water narrowed to a trickle, then vanished into a cave. He ducked inside, barefoot on cold stone, guiding himself by the pulse he could now hear in his chest. The deeper he went, the louder it grew, not loud like thunder, but deep like heartbeat. When he reached the end of the cave, he saw it, a faint light glimmering from a wall of stone, shaped like a keyhole. He didn't know why, but he reached into his pocket. His fingers brushed something small, metallic, smooth, a key. It wasn't his. He didn't remember finding it, but it fit perfectly. When he turned it, the stone breathed. A wave of warmth rolled through the cave, through the mountain, through the whole valley. The hum returned, full and alive, pouring out of the earth like water freed from ice. Noel stumbled back, tears spilling down his face. It was not fear, it was recognition. The villagers heard it too. They came running, torches flickering in the night. But when they saw that light pouring from the cave, they fell silent, lapping ill. This son, you know how I'm mad at you. One night, when the moon hung low and fat, he followed that sound upstream. The water narrowed to a trickle, then vanished into a cave. He ducked inside, barefoot on cold stone, guiding himself by the pulse he could now hear in his chest. The deeper he went, the louder it grew, not loud like thunder, but deep with heartbeat. When he reached the end of the cave, he saw it, faint light glimmering from a wall of stone, shaped like a keyhole. He didn't know why, but he reached into his pocket. His fingers brushed something small, metallic, smooth, a key. It wasn't his. He didn't remember finding it, but it fit perfectly. When he turned it, the stone breathed. A wave of warmth rolled through the cave, through the mountain, through the whole valley. The hum returned, full and alive, pouring out of the earth like water freed from ice. Noel stumbled back, tears spilling down his face. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. The villagers heard it too. They came running, torches flickering in the night. But when they saw that light pouring from the cave, they fell silent. The hum washed over M, deep and steady, and for the first time in generations they felt something they couldn't name. It was peace, yes, but more than that, it was remembrance. They didn't understand the story, but they knew the truth. The hum had come home again. In the days that followed, the world began to change. People no longer spoke of rebuilding, they spoke of returning. They planted slower, built with care, shared without debt. They sang simple songs, each one humming the old tone at its end. The hum became their clock and compass. They didn't measure time in minutes anymore, but in breaths, in seasons, in patience. They fade this new age, the long dawn. Noel grew old beside that river. He never claimed to understand what he'd found. It ain't mine, he'd say when asked. It just passed through me, same way it always does. But when he spoke, the hum deepened like it was nodding along. And when he died, they buried him beside the cave, where the keyhole still glowed faintly. His people didn't mourn loud, they hummed, low, united, like the world itself was singing him home. Centuries turned again. The long dawn gave way to other ages, some loud, some quiet, some burning, some rebuilding. But no matter how far it drifted, the hum endured. It lived in lullabies and windmills in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Every civilization found it anew, called it by a different name, shaped it into different art. But the song never changed. Patience, presence, time. That was the trinity it taught, Ed and Dan, till even stars sang it in their dying breath. And if someday the whole of existence fades again, swallowed by dark or born into something brighter, the hum still be there. Not to start it over, just to keep it steady, to whisper to the next creation, it had whispered to the last. Don't rush, child. Eternity got time enough for you. Then the hum will settle once more, deep and quiet, waiting for another listener. A new traveler, a patient soul, someone sitting by a window in the rain or staring out at a far horizon. And when that moment comes, it'll begin again. Always the same, always different, always true. The hum don't end, it just waits. That's what it always done. That what it was born to do. And maybe right now, somewhere deep inside your own stillness, it's waiting for you too.